Chapter 1. The dimensional gap had no sound of its own. It was a place before sound, before light, before the first word had ever been spoken into the dark. And yet, for one instant that could not be measured in any calendar known to gods or devils or angels, it was filled with the thin, furious cry of an infant. Ophis did not understand the noise at first. She had existed for longer than existence itself could properly account for, a serpent coiled around the concept of infinity, silent and still and utterly alone. She had watched dimensions bloom and collapse the way a bystander watches rain. Nothing had ever required anything of her. Nothing had ever needed her. The child in her arms needed her. She looked down at him, small and red-faced and impossibly loud, and felt something she had no name for, because the concept had never before had reason to exist inside her. His hair was a dark, unruly brown. His eyes, when he finally stopped screaming long enough to open them, were the deep, endless black of the gap itself, flecked faintly with silver, as though someone had taken a piece of the void and given it a pulse. She did not know where he had come from. That was the strange part, the part she turned over again and again in the perfect silence of her domain. There had been no lover, no ritual, no moment of joining. There had simply been a want, formed somewhere in the endless calm of her existence, a small crack of curiosity about what it might be to not be alone. And the gap, which answered to her in ways not even she fully understood, had listened. He was hers. That much she knew instantly and completely. Whatever laws governed birth among gods and devils and dragons did not apply to her, because she predated the laws themselves. Issei, she said, testing the shape of it in a voice and used to speaking softly. Your name is Issei. She did not know why she chose it. It simply felt correct, the way certain numbers felt correct, the way a closed loop felt more correct than an open one. He quieted at the sound of her voice, small fists uncurling, and stared up at her with those void black eyes as if he already understood that this strange, still woman was the only anchor he had in a place with no floor and no ceiling and no direction at all. For the first 3 years of his life, Issei knew nothing but the gap. He knew his mother's silence, and the way it could mean 100 different things depending on how she held her shoulders. He knew the endless gray nothing that stretched in every direction, broken only by the occasional stray fragment of some collapsed universe drifting past like a bubble in still water. He knew hunger, and cold, and the particular comfort of being lifted into arms that never trembled. He did not know that a war was ending in the world Ophis rarely visited. He did not know that 2 factions of dragons had spent centuries destroying oceans and mountain ranges in their endless rivalry, or that one of them, a crimson terror named Great Red, had claimed the gap as a nesting ground long before Ophis had ever cared enough to notice. He did not know that his mother's calm was not peace. It was patience. It was the long, slow-burning patience of something that had waited so many ages for a fight worth finishing that waiting had become indistinguishable from breathing. He learned some of this eventually, in pieces, the way children learn anything, through the gaps between what adults think they are hiding and what they actually say aloud. When you are strong enough, Ophis told him once, when he was old enough to sit upright and young enough to still believe every word his mother said was simply true, the way gravity was true, we will go to the world together. There are things there that took what was mine. I would like it returned. What things? Issei asked. A home, she said. It does not matter now. It will matter later. He did not press her further. There was something in her voice, flat as it was, that told him this was not a conversation for a child, even one who lived in a place where time meant very little. He filed it away instead, the way he filed away everything else she told him, in the quiet, patient part of his mind that was already, even then, more like her than either of them fully realized. By the time he was 7, by whatever measure of years could apply to a boy raised outside of time, Issei could walk on nothing. Not fly, not exactly, though it looked similar to anyone watching. He simply understood, in a way that came from his mother's blood rather than any lesson, that the gap did not actually require a floor. If he decided the space beneath his feet was solid, it was solid. If he decided it was not, it opened beneath him like a held breath finally released, and he fell through nothing into more nothing, laughing the whole way down until his mother caught him without ever seeming to have moved. You are careless, she said, setting him back on his feet with the same flat patience she used for everything. I like falling, Issei said. It's fun. It is dangerous. You always catch me. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the way it always was, and something in her chest, some small foreign warmth she had never asked for, and could not have refused if she tried, tightened just slightly. I will not always be able to, she said. You should learn to catch yourself. It was, Issei would realize much later, the closest thing to a lesson in mortality that his mother, who did not fully understand mortality herself, knew how to give him. He grew slowly, the way things grow in a place with no seasons to mark the passage of growing. His hair darkened further. His shoulders widened. Something began to stir low in his chest sometime around what should have been his 10th year. A low hum like a second heartbeat, patient and coiled and enormous, that had not been there before. Ophis noticed it before he did. She always noticed things about him before he did, the way a gardener notices a seed cracking open before the first green shoot ever breaks the surface. There is something in you, she said one day, without preamble, because preamble was a concept that had never taken root in her. Issei pressed a hand flat against his own sternum, feeling for whatever she meant. He felt only himself, warm and solid and slightly out of breath from an afternoon of chasing his own shadow through folded space. What kind of something? I do not know yet, Ophis admitted, and it was rare enough for her to admit not knowing anything that Issei sat up a little straighter. It is old. It is patient. It has been sleeping for a very long time. Is it bad? I do not know that either. She reached out and rested 2 fingers lightly against his chest, over the place where the hum was strongest, and for a moment her expression, always so still, flickered with something almost like curiosity. Almost like wonder. It is not like anything I have felt before. It does not feel like a weapon. It feels like a question that has not yet decided what its answer will be. Issei did not fully understand what that meant. He was 10, or something close enough to 10 that the distinction hardly mattered, and questions about the nature of his own soul were somewhat beyond him. What he understood, in the simple and direct way children understand things, was that his mother was not afraid. If she was not afraid, then he did not need to be either. He did not know, could not have known, that the thing curled inside his chest was older than most of the beings who would one day call themselves gods. He did not know its name, or the names of the 2 brothers who had come before it, and worn crimson and white in their turns, burning bright and burning out in a rivalry that had scorched the edges of heaven itself. He did not know that dragons of that bloodline were rare enough that entire pantheons kept careful watch for their birth, the way a kingdom watches for the birth of a prince. He only knew that something inside him had begun to wake up, slowly, the way frost begins to melt from the inside of a window on the first warm morning of spring, and that when it finally opened its eyes fully, nothing in his life, or his mother's life, or the world either of them had yet properly visited, would ever be quite the same again. It happened, as these things so often do, without warning. Issei was 13. He had wandered further from his mother's side than he usually did, chasing a drifting fragment of shattered reality that glittered faintly gold at its edges, the kind of debris that sometimes held echoes of the world beyond the gap, fractured memories of sunlight and rain and voices that were not his mother's. He liked collecting them. He kept a small, careful pile of the fragments in the corner of nothing he had claimed as his own, each one a tiny window into a life he had never lived. He reached for this one, fingers brushing its jagged, glowing edge, and the world went white. Not white like light. White like absence, like every sense he had was suddenly scoured clean and rebuilt from nothing. He heard, from somewhere that was both inside his own skull and echoing across some vast, ancient distance, a voice that was not his mother's and not his own, deep and rolling and edged with something that might have been amusement, or might have been hunger. Partner, it said, and the word landed in him like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through every part of him at once. It has been a very long time since I had one of those. Issei fell. There was no floor to catch him, only nothing, only the endless gray of the gap rushing past as his own weight finally, truly asserted itself for the first time in his short life. He did not have time to be afraid. He did not have time to call for his mother. He had time only to feel his own arm change beneath him, skin becoming scale, becoming something vast and dark and gleaming, wings he had never had unfolding from his back in a rush of displaced air that shoved the very fabric of nothing outward in a shockwave he felt more than heard. Then his mother's arms were around him, and the falling stopped. Ophis held him against her chest, one hand pressed flat between his shoulder blades, and for the first time in his life Issei felt her heartbeat quicken, just slightly, just enough that he would remember it for the rest of his days. She was looking not at him, but at the arm still half transformed, black scales catching a light that had no source, a long unbroken line of something ancient, an enormous humming just beneath his skin like a second pulse finally, fully awake. "There you are," she said, so quietly it was almost lost. Issei was never sure, afterward, whether she was speaking to him, or to the thing inside him, or to some old and private thought of her own that she never explained. The scales receded slowly, retreating back into skin the way a tide retreats from the shore, and the wings folded away into nothing, and Issei was 13 years old again, shaking, gasping, held tightly against the chest of the only person he had ever known. "What was that?" he managed. "What happened?" There was a voice. "You have awakened," Ophis said. She drew back just enough to look at his face, and there was something new in her own expression, something Issei had never seen there before and would spend years afterward trying to properly name. Pride, perhaps. Or recognition. Or the particular ache of watching something you love become, all at once, something far larger than you had ever fully prepared for. "Sooner than I expected. You carry a very old bloodline, Issei. Older than most of the wars fought over it." "What bloodline?" His voice cracked on the second word, half from fear and half from the strange electric thrill still humming under his skin. "What am I?" Ophis was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting past him, out toward the endless gray nothing of the gap, as though she were looking through it into some other place entirely, some other time. "There were 2 dragons once," she said slowly, "who burned brighter than any other creature in the world. One wore red. One wore white. They fought each other so fiercely, for so long, that heaven itself grew afraid of them and struck them down, sealing what remained of their souls into rings so that their power might never again threaten the balance of things." She paused. "But there was a third. Quieter than the other 2. Patient, where they were proud. It did not seek glory, and so it was never sealed away in the same fashion. It simply slept, waiting for a vessel worthy of carrying it, for so long that most of the world forgot it had ever existed at all. And that's what's inside me." "Yes." "What's it called?" Ophis looked at him again, and for once, her stillness cracked just enough to let something warmer through, something that might, in anyone else, have been called a small and private smile. "Kurishin," she said. "The Black Serpent. It is not the same lineage as the 2 that came before it, though the world may try to name you in their shadow. You will not be red, and you will not be white." She reached out and touched his chest again, over the place where the hum still pulsed steady and slow, like something enormous finally, quietly stirring from a very long sleep. "You will be the Black Dragon Emperor. And when you are ready, we will go to the world, and you will help me take back what is mine." Issei looked down at his own hand, turning it over slowly, watching for any trace of scale that might return. He did not fully understand what any of it meant yet, the weight of the name his mother had just given him, the centuries of history he had just been dropped into the middle of without any say in the matter. He understood only that something ancient had chosen him, that his mother was looking at him with something close to warmth for the first time he could clearly remember, and that somewhere far beyond the gray nothing of the gap, an entire world was about to learn his name. He did not know yet how much that world would come to fear it, and how much, in time, it would also come to need it. Chapter 2. 3 more years passed in the gap before Ophis decided her son was ready, though ready was a word she used carefully, the way she used all words, only when she had turned it over enough times to be certain it fit. In that time, Issei learned what it meant to carry Kurishin. The voice in his head, which he had come to think of simply as the dragon, or sometimes, when it was in a talkative mood, as an old and occasionally insufferable roommate, taught him in fits and starts, the way any teacher teaches a student it has not had in centuries and is slowly remembering how to handle. I am not like my brothers, the dragon told him once, while Issei sat cross-legged in the nothing, trying and failing to summon so much as a single scale on command. They wanted glory. They wanted the world to look at them and tremble. I only ever wanted a war worth finishing. What war? Issei asked. An old one. Older than your mother's patience, and she has more of that than anyone I have ever met. It does not matter yet. What matters is that you learn to call me properly, instead of falling out of the sky like a startled bird every time I decide to introduce myself. Issei scowled, though there was no real heat in it. That only happened once. Twice, the dragon corrected, with what might have been the draconic equivalent of a smirk. But who is counting? By his 14th year, Issei could summon a single gauntlet at will, black-scaled and humming with restrained power, a jewel embedded in the back of it that pulsed faintly whenever he called on Kyushin's strength. By his 15th, he could summon the full armor, wings and all, though holding it for longer than a few minutes still left him breathless and shaking, his mother watching from a short distance with an expression that was equal parts approval and something more careful, more protective, that she rarely let show. You push yourself too hard, she told him once, after he had collapsed to one knee, the armor flickering and dissolving around him faster than he wanted it to. I want to be strong enough, Issei said between breaths. For when we go. For whatever's waiting for us there. Ophis knelt beside him, resting a hand against his back the way she had when he was small enough to be carried everywhere. Strength is not the only thing that will matter, she said. But I understand the wanting. She did not explain further, and Issei, who had learned by then not to push too hard against his mother's silences, let it go. What she did not tell him, not fully, not yet, was the shape of what waited for them beyond the gap. She told him fragments. That there was a world of devils and angels and fallen angels, locked in an old and uneasy truce after a war that had nearly ended all three factions at once. That dragons like him were watched carefully by all of them, courted by some, feared by others, occasionally hunted by those who saw ancient power as a threat to their own carefully built order. That there was a place, a specific town in a specific corner of that world, where something had once belonged to her, some fragment of authority or territory she never described in detail, and where she intended, eventually, to go and take it back. Why not just go now? Issei asked her, one day when his patience for waiting had finally worn thin enough to ask outright. You're strong enough. I've seen what you can do, because it is not only about strength, Ophis said. It is about understanding what I am walking into. I have not concerned myself with that world in a very long time. It has changed since I last paid it attention. I would prefer my son understand it as well, before he is thrown into the middle of it. It was, Issei would realize much later, one of the most careful and deliberate things his mother had ever done for him. Ophis, who had existed before understanding had ever been a necessary concept, who had spent the whole of her endless existence needing nothing and no one, had spent years quietly preparing her son for a world she barely understood herself, simply because she did not want him to walk into it unprepared the way she once might have walked into anything without a second thought. She began, slowly, to bring pieces of that world into the gap for him to study. Fragments of memory pulled from careless travelers who passed too close to the boundary between dimensions, echoes of history caught, and preserved the way a photograph preserves a single frozen moment. Issei learned about the Underworld, the Devil's Home, and the great houses that ruled it, families with names like Gremory and Citri and Phoenix, each one a pillar of what remained of the 72 original devil clans after a civil war had reduced their numbers to a fraction of what they once were. He learned about heaven, orderly and distant, and about the fallen, angels who had lost their halos to sin or pride or simple, human love, and who now made their uneasy home somewhere between the two. He learned, too, about the two dragons his own bloodline was so often compared to, even though his mother insisted, every time the subject came up, that the comparison was an imperfect one. The Red Dragon Emperor, wielder of the boosted gear, whose power doubled again and again until it could, in theory, threaten even gods. The White Dragon Emperor, his eternal rival, wielder of the divine dividing, who could have the power of anything he touched until his enemies were left as helpless as newborns. Both had been sealed into sacred gears, artifacts that bound their souls to human hosts, passed down through generations of ordinary people who had no idea what slept inside them until the day it finally woke. Is that what happened to me? Issei asked, turning the question over carefully. Am I a sacred gear? No, the dragon said before Ophis could answer. I am not bound the way my brothers are bound. I chose you, Issei. There is a difference, and it matters more than you currently understand. Ophis nodded slowly, confirming it. Curation was never sealed. It has always simply slept, waiting. It found you the way a river finds the lowest point in the land. Not because it was forced to, but because it was, in the end, the only place it could have gone. Issei sat with that for a long time, turning it over the way he turned over everything his mother told him, slowly and carefully, until it settled into some part of him that felt, more and more as the years passed, less like a child's understanding and more like a young man's. He was 16, by whatever measure applied to a childhood spent almost entirely outside of time, when Ophis finally told him it was time to go. There is a town, she said, called Ko. It sits atop a piece of what was once mine, before it was claimed by another faction entirely, sealed beneath layers of territorial magic I have chosen, until now, not to contest. You will attend the human school there. You will live among humans, and devils, and whatever else has made its home in that town without my notice. You will learn to move through that world the way I have taught you to understand it. And when the moment comes that I judge you ready, we will take back what belongs to me. Just like that, Issei said. You're sending me to high school. I am sending you, Ophis corrected, to learn. The rest is simply the shape that learning will take. She studied him for a long moment, and there was something in her expression that Issei had rarely seen there before, something that might, in a warmer person, have looked almost like nervousness. I will not be far. I can reach you the moment you call. But I want you to walk into that world on your own feet, Issei, not carried in mine. You are strong enough now. I have made certain of it. Issei looked at his own hands, remembering the boy who used to fall through nothing and laugh the whole way down, certain his mother would always catch him. He was not that boy anymore, not entirely. Some part of him would always be, he suspected, no matter how old he grew. But another part of him, quieter and steadier, had spent years now preparing for exactly this moment, and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he was not afraid. Okay, he said. I'm ready. Ophis reached out and rested her hand against the side of his face, an unusually tender gesture from a woman who had built her entire existence on stillness and distance. You will do well, she said. And when you need me, I will not be far. The tear in the world she opened for him was small, barely large enough for a single person to pass through, a thin seam of golden light against the endless gray of the gap. Issei looked back at his mother one last time before he stepped through it, the only home and the only family he had ever known standing perfectly still amid the nothing, watching him go with an expression that, for once, held nothing back at all. I'll come back, he told her. Whatever happens out there. I'll come back. I know, Ophis said. You are mine. That has never once been in question. He stepped through the light, and the world, loud and bright and impossibly full in a way nothing in the gap had ever prepared him for, swallowed him whole. Chapter 3. Ko Town smelled like rain on warm asphalt, and cherry blossoms even though it was well past their season, and 100 other small human things that Issei had no name for because he had never once, in 16 years of life, needed to breathe air that came from anywhere but the recycled stillness of the gap. He stood on a quiet residential street for a long moment after the tear in the world sealed itself shut behind him, simply breathing, letting the strangeness of it settle into his chest. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. A car passed, its engine a low mechanical hum entirely unlike anything he had ever heard. The sky above him was a soft, fading orange, the sun sinking somewhere behind rooftops he did not recognize, and for the first time in his life Issei understood, in a way no fragment of memory or careful lesson from his mother could have fully prepared him for, what it meant to stand beneath an actual sky. You are staring, the dragon observed, sounding faintly amused. It is only a sunset, Issei. I've literally never seen one, Issei muttered under his breath, aware even as he said it that he probably looked strange, standing alone on a sidewalk with his head tilted back, gawking at the sky like a tourist. Cut me some slack. Fair enough. Ophis had arranged everything with the quiet, absolute efficiency of someone who did not concern herself with details until they became necessary, and then made certain they were handled perfectly. A small apartment near the edge of town, paid for through channels Issei did not ask too many questions about. Enrollment papers at Ko Academy, a school that had until recently been an all-girls institution before quietly opening its doors to boys as well, listing him as a transfer student from a private tutoring background abroad, a story vague enough to explain any gaps in his education without inviting too much scrutiny. A uniform, folded neatly and waiting for him on the apartment's single bed when he arrived, the blazer stiff and unfamiliar against his shoulders when he tried it on that first night, turning slowly in front of a mirror and hardly recognizing the reflection looking back. He did not sleep well. Not because the apartment was uncomfortable, though the bed felt strange after years of resting against nothing at all, but because his mind kept turning over the same quiet worry, small and persistent as a stone in his shoe. He had spent his entire life around exactly one person. Tomorrow, he would be surrounded by hundreds of them, none of whom knew anything about him at all. Ko Academy in the morning was a wall of sound. Voices layered over voices, footsteps on stone paths, the distant clang of some kind of bell, laughter that rose and fell in waves he had no context for. Issei stood just inside the front gate for a long moment, gripping the strap of his school bag, and reminded himself, silently and firmly, that he had faced down his own half-awakened dragon form falling through infinite nothing without panicking. He could handle a hallway full of teenagers. I remain unconvinced these are meaningfully different challenges, the dragon offered. Not helpful, Issei muttered. He found his classroom without too much trouble, guided by directions his mother had somehow procured along with everything else, and slipped into his assigned seat near the back just as the morning bell rang, drawing exactly the amount of attention he had hoped to avoid, which was to say, quite a lot. New students, he was quickly learning, were a novelty in a school this size, and novelty drew eyes the way honey drew flies. Hey! New guy! Issei turned to find the boy in the seat beside him leaning over with an expression of intense, almost desperate curiosity, sandy-haired and grinning in a way that suggested he had already decided, unilaterally, that they were going to be friends. Matsuda, the boy said, sticking out a hand. You transferred in, right? From where? Issei, he said, shaking the offered hand carefully, aware even as he did it that he had no real practice at the gesture, and hoping he was not somehow doing it wrong. Abroad. It's complicated. Complicated how? Like international spy complicated, or like your parents got divorced complicated. Matsuda, leave him alone, he's been here 5 minutes, said another voice, and a second boy leaned into view from Matsuda's other side, shorter, with glasses that caught the light in a way that made his eyes briefly unreadable. I'm Motohama. Ignore him, he does this to everyone. I do not do this to everyone, Matsuda protested. I do this to interesting people. And a guy who transfers in halfway through the term with zero explanation is interesting. Issei found himself, somewhat to his own surprise, almost smiling. There was something disarming about the sheer, uncomplicated energy of it, so different from the careful stillness he had grown up inside. It really is complicated, he said. I promise I'm not a spy. That's exactly what a spy would say, Matsuda said, but he was grinning, and Motohama was already turning back around as the teacher entered the room, and just like that, with no fanfare at all, Issei had somehow acquired his first 2 friends. The rest of the day passed in a strange, disorienting blur of new information. Subjects that assumed a foundation of human schooling he did not entirely have, though he found, gratefully, that a childhood spent absorbing fragments of memory and careful lessons from an ancient and endlessly patient teacher had left him quicker on his feet than he expected. Faces and names that blurred together faster than he could properly sort them. The strange, specific rhythm of bells and passing periods and the low hum of 100 ordinary teenage conversations happening all around him at once, about homework and crushes and weekend plans, none of which had anything to do with dragons or dimensions or ancient wars fought over rings sealed away in heaven. It was, in its own way, exactly what his mother had wanted for him. A place to simply be a person for a while, before the weight of everything else came due. It lasted until lunch. He felt it before he saw it, the way he had learned, over years of quiet instruction, to feel the particular texture of power that did not belong to humans. It brushed against his senses the moment he stepped out into the school's central courtyard, tray in hand, Matsuda and Motohama already several steps ahead of him arguing about something involving a video game Issei had never heard of. It was faint, carefully banked, clearly restrained by whoever carried it, but unmistakable all the same, the low, cool hum of something ancient and aristocratic and entirely inhuman moving somewhere nearby. He followed the feeling with his eyes before he consciously decided to, and found her almost immediately, seated beneath a tree near the courtyard's edge, surrounded by a small circle of students who all seemed, in some subtle way Issei could not quite articulate, to be orbiting around her rather than simply sitting near her. She had crimson hair, long and loose, catching the midday light in a way that made it look almost like it was burning. Her eyes, when they lifted, unhurried, and found his across the width of the courtyard, were a deep, striking blue-green, sharp with an intelligence that felt older than the rest of her. "Devil," the dragon said quietly, almost lazily, as though confirming something it had already suspected the moment they walked through the school gates. "High class, and not a young one either. That is a Gremory, Issei. There are not many left with hair that particular shade of red." Issei held her gaze for a moment longer than was probably wise, some instinct he did not fully understand telling him not to look away first, and saw, in the brief span of that held look, her expression shift from mild curiosity into something sharper, more focused, more careful. She had felt something too. He was certain of it. "Issei? You coming or what?" Matsuda called from several paces ahead, oblivious to the entire silent exchange that had just passed between his new friend and the single most popular girl in school. Issei broke the gaze first after all, following after his friends with his heart beating a little too fast in his chest, and did not look back, though he could feel her eyes on him for a long moment after, weighing, assessing, already, he suspected, beginning to wonder exactly what had just walked into her territory. "You should be careful," the dragon said, its earlier amusement gone, replaced by something more measured. "This town belongs to her family. If your mother is right about what she once held here, that girl and her peerage are standing directly on top of it." "I know," Issei said quietly, under his breath, careful not to let Matsuda or Motohama hear him apparently talking to himself. "I felt that too." He thought of his mother's words before he had stepped through the tear in the world. "Learn to move through that world the way I have taught you to understand it." He had assumed, in the quiet arrogance of a boy who had never actually tested himself against anyone but his own dragon, that this part would be simple. Attend classes. Make a few friends. Wait for his mother's word. Looking across the courtyard at the crimson-haired girl who had already marked him as something worth watching, Issei suspected, for the first time since stepping through that golden seam of light, that nothing about this was going to be simple at all. Chapter 4. The summons came 3 days later, in the form of a folded note tucked into Issei's shoe locker, written in neat, elegant handwriting that felt, somehow, exactly like the girl who had watched him across the courtyard. "Meet me on the roof after school. Come alone." He almost laughed at the audacity of it. In another life, a life where he had grown up with an ordinary family in an ordinary house, a note like that might have made his heart race for entirely different reasons. As it was, he simply folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket, feeling the low, patient hum of Kurishin stir faintly beneath his ribs in what might have been anticipation. "She wants to talk," the dragon said. "Or she wants to test you. With devils of that particular bloodline, it is rarely only one or the other. Should I be worried?" "Not yet. But you should be careful." The roof of Ko Academy. When Issei climbed the last flight of stairs and pushed through the access door into the fading afternoon light, was mostly empty, ringed by a low fence and a scattering of ventilation units that hummed quietly in the background. The crimson-haired girl stood near the center of it, hands folded in front of her, and beside her stood a second girl, dark-haired and softly smiling, with an aura that felt, to Issei's careful senses, almost as old and layered as her companions, though shaped differently, cooler somehow, edged with something that reminded him faintly of storm clouds. "You came," the crimson-haired girl said. I wasn't entirely certain you would. Your note was pretty direct, Issei said, stopping a careful distance away, close enough for conversation, far enough to give himself room to react if he needed to. Figured ignoring it would just make things more complicated. Smart. She studied him for a long moment, the same careful, assessing look she had given him across the courtyard, before extending a hand with the easy confidence of someone entirely used to being in control of every room she entered. Rias Gremory. This is Akino Himejima. The dark-haired girl beside her offered a small, polite bow, her smile never wavering. I think you already know what we are. I have a decent guess, Issei said, not taking the offered hand yet, watching her carefully. You're devils. High class from the feel of it. And this whole town belongs to you. Something flickered across Rias's expression, brief and sharp, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Most humans can't sense that at all, she said. And you said it like you already knew before I confirmed it. Which tells me you're not human. Or not entirely. I'm not, Issei agreed. There did not seem to be much point in denying it, not standing this close to two devils who had clearly already sensed exactly what he was, or at least sensed that he was something. I'm also not here looking for trouble, if that's what you're worried about. Then what are you here for? Rias asked, and there was something careful beneath the polite curiosity of the question, a wariness Issei recognized because he had felt something close to it himself, standing in a school full of strangers with no idea yet who he could trust. A power like yours doesn't just wander into a devil's territory without a reason. Issei considered his answer carefully. His mother had told him to move through this world with understanding, not conflict, and lying outright to the air of the territory he was currently standing in did not strike him as a particularly good first step toward either. I'm here to go to school, he said finally. That part's true. But I'm also here because something my family used to hold is somewhere in this town. I don't fully know the details yet. I was told to be patient and learn the lay of the land before I did anything about it. Rias's eyes narrowed slightly. Something your family used to hold, she repeated. This territory has belonged to the Gremory clan for generations. If you're implying otherwise. I'm not trying to start a fight over old history, Issei said, holding up both hands in a gesture he hoped read as placating rather than defensive. I don't even know the full story myself. I just know I'm not here to cause trouble for you or your peerage. I want to go to school, make some friends, figure out how any of this works. If that changes, you'll be the first to know. I promise. There was a long, tense silence, broken only by the low hum of the ventilation units and the distant sound of student voices drifting up from somewhere below. Akino tilted her head slightly, studying him with an expression that had shifted from polite curiosity into something more genuinely interested. He's telling the truth, she said quietly to Rias. Or at least, he believes what he's saying is true. Rias exhaled slowly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders, though her eyes remained sharp, watchful. Fine, she said. I'll take you at your word for now. But I want to know what you are, at the very least. It's only fair, considering you already know what I am. Issei hesitated. He had not expected the conversation to reach this point quite so quickly, and some old, careful instinct, inherited perhaps from a mother who revealed almost nothing about herself without long deliberation, made him want to hold the truth close a while longer. But there was something in Rias Gremory's steady, unflinching gaze that told him half-truths and careful evasions were not going to satisfy her for long, and he suspected, given how much power he could already feel banked carefully beneath her calm exterior, that making an enemy of her this early would be a very poor way to start his time in this town. I'm a dragon, he said finally. Not a sacred gear holder, not exactly. Something older than that. My mother calls me the Black Dragon Emperor. Whatever reaction he had braced himself for, the sudden, complete stillness that settled over both girls was not quite it. Rias's eyes widened fractionally, and Akino's polite smile faded into something more serious, more focused. The Black Dragon Emperor, Rias repeated slowly, as though testing whether the words might rearrange themselves into something less improbable if she said them again. I've never heard of a third heavenly dragon. There's the red and the white. Everyone knows the red and the white. There were only ever supposed to be two, Issei agreed. That's what I've been told too. But apparently there was a third, quieter one, that never got sealed the same way the other two did. It just slept for a long time, until it found me. Until it found you, Rias echoed. Meaning your sacred gear. Isn't a sacred gear, Issei said. It's not bound to me by any artifact I know of. My dragon chose me on its own. My mother says that's rare enough that most of the world assumes it isn't even possible. Rias was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an intensity that made Issei distinctly aware of exactly how exposed he had just made himself, standing on an open rooftop having just handed the heir of a great house information that, in the wrong hands, could very easily be turned into a weapon. You said your mother, Rias said finally, carefully. May I ask who that is? Issei considered lying. It would have been easy enough, and safer, probably, to invent some vague story about a minor dragon clan and leave it at that. But something about the steady, searching honesty in Rias Gremory's expression, the sense that she was genuinely trying to understand rather than simply extract information to use against him, made him decide, against every careful instinct his mother had spent years drilling into him, to tell the truth. Ophis, he said. The Ouroboros Dragon. I'm her son. The silence that followed was so complete that Issei could hear his own heartbeat, and beside him, Akino's breath catch audibly. Rias had gone very pale, her hands curling slightly at her sides, and for the first time since he had arrived on that rooftop, Issei watched the careful, controlled composure of the heir to the Gremory clan crack open just slightly, revealing something underneath that looked, unmistakably, like fear. Ophis doesn't have children, Rias said, her voice tighter than before. Ophis doesn't have anything. She's not supposed to want anything at all. That's the entire point of what she is. I didn't say it made sense, Issei said quietly. I just said it's true. Rias stared at him for a long moment, and Issei watched her visibly work to rebuild the composure that had cracked, watched her draw herself back up into the careful, controlled bearing of a great house heir standing on her own territory in front of a threat she had not expected and did not yet fully know how to measure. If what you're saying is true, she said slowly, then you understand why I have to be careful. The strongest neutral entity in existence just told me she has a son, standing on my family's territory, telling me she once held something here that she wants back. That is not a small thing, Issei. That is potentially the beginning of a very large problem. I know, Issei said. That's exactly why I came when you asked instead of ignoring the note. I'm not trying to hide what I am from you. I'd rather you understand it, and understand that I'm not here looking for a fight, than have you find out some other way and assume the worst. Something in Rias's expression eased, just slightly, though the wariness in her eyes did not fully disappear. That's either very honest, she said, or very clever? I haven't decided which yet. Maybe it's both, Issei offered, and for the first time since the conversation had started, he saw the faintest ghost of something like amusement pass across her face. Maybe, she agreed. All right. I won't move against you, not yet, not while you're keeping your word about staying peaceful. But I want you to understand something in return. Her voice hardened slightly, the full weight of her lineage settling back into her posture. This is my family's territory. My peerage and I are responsible for everyone in it, human and otherwise. If whatever your mother is planning threatens the people here, I will stand against her, and against you, regardless of what either of you are capable of. Is that clear? Issei held her gaze and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he respected the answer more than he resented it. It was exactly the kind of steady, protective conviction his mother, in her own quiet way, had spent years teaching him to value. Clear, he said. For what it's worth, I don't think it has to come to that. I think there's a way to figure this out without anyone getting hurt. I'd like to try that first, if you're willing. Rias studied him a moment longer, and then, slowly, extended her hand again, the same gesture she had offered at the start of the conversation, before everything had shifted beneath them both. All right, she said. Let's try that first. Issei took her hand this time, and shook it, and felt, faintly, the low hum of Kurishin settle beneath his ribs in something that felt almost like approval. You handled that better than I expected, the dragon said, as Rias and Akino turned to head back toward the stairwell, leaving him alone on the rooftop with the fading afternoon light. Perhaps there is hope for you yet. High praise, Issei muttered, and allowed himself, finally, now that the tension of the conversation had drained out of him, a long, unsteady breath. He had come to this town expecting, at most, a quiet year of ordinary school before his mother called him back to whatever confrontation waited at the end of all this. He was beginning to suspect, standing alone on that rooftop with the whole weight of a great house's careful attention now settled on him, that quiet had never really been in the cards at all. Chapter 5. The days that followed settled into something Issei had never had the chance to experience before, an actual rhythm to ordinary life. Mornings with Matsuda and Motohama arguing about whatever new game had captured their attention that week. Classes that grew steadily less overwhelming as he found his footing. Lunches spent on the school roof more often than not, sometimes alone, sometimes, more frequently than he expected, with Rias or Aquino finding some excuse to join him, the wary tension of that first conversation slowly softening, without either of them quite acknowledging it out loud, into something closer to an actual, tentative friendship. He met the rest of her peerage gradually, in the careful, unhurried way Rias seemed to introduce anything that mattered to her. Kiba Yudo, a blonde, easygoing boy with a swordsman's economy of movement who greeted Issei with a polite, measuring smile that suggested he was quietly cataloging exactly how dangerous the new dragon in town might be, even while making perfectly pleasant conversation about class schedules. Kaneko Tuju, small and quiet and startlingly strong, who said almost nothing the first several times they met but who Issei noticed, without ever mentioning it, watching him with sharp, careful attention whenever she thought he wasn't looking. "You're doing better than I expected," Rias told him one afternoon, nearly 2 weeks into his time at Ko, as they sat together on the roof, the autumn air just beginning to carry the first cool edge of the coming winter. "I half expected you to either vanish after our first conversation or start causing problems within the week." "I told you I wasn't looking for trouble," Issei said, leaning back against the low fence, watching a scattering of birds wheel overhead against the sky he still, weeks later, had not entirely gotten used to actually seeing. "I meant it. People say a lot of things they mean in the moment," Rias said. "It's rarer to actually watch someone follow through." She was quiet for a moment, turning something over, before she added more carefully, "Have you told your mother how things are going? With us, I mean. With the town." "Not yet," Issei admitted. "She said she wouldn't be far if I needed her, but she also told me she wanted me to figure things out on my own, mostly. I think she's waiting to see what I do with it before she gets involved again." "That's either a very trusting way to raise a child," Rias said, "or a very calculated one." Issei considered that for a moment, thinking of his mother's stillness, her long silences that always seemed to carry more weight than they let on, the rare unguarded warmth she allowed herself only in moments that mattered most. "Probably both," he said finally. "I don't think those things are as separate for her as they'd be for most people." It was, in its own quiet way, one of the more honest things he had said about his mother to anyone since arriving in Ko, and Rias seemed to sense the weight of it, letting the subject rest without pushing further, which Issei found he appreciated more than he expected to. The peace held for 3 weeks. It broke on a Tuesday evening, on Issei's walk home from a study session Matsuda had somehow talked him into, when the low, familiar hum of Kyushin's senses flared sharp and sudden in his chest, catching something twisted and wrong moving through the alleys a few streets over. "Stray devil," the dragon said, its usual dry amusement gone entirely, replaced by something flatter, more alert. "A rogue one, unbound from any peerage. That is not a small thing to feel wandering loose in the middle of a residential district, Issei." Issei did not hesitate. He had spent 3 weeks being careful, being patient, keeping the promise he had made to Rias on that rooftop. But a stray devil loose among ordinary humans, people who had no idea any of this existed at all, was exactly the kind of threat his mother had spent years teaching him not to ignore. He followed the wrongness down a side street and into a narrow, half-lit alley behind a row of closed shops, and found it waiting for him there. A thing that had clearly once been humanoid and was no longer, its form stretched and warped into something with too many joints and a mouth that opened far wider than any jaw should allow, dripping something dark onto the cracked pavement beneath it. "Well," Issei said, forcing his voice steady despite the cold jolt of adrenaline running through him, That's not something you see every day. The stray devil's head snapped toward him with unnerving speed, and it let out a low, wet snarl that Issei felt more than heard, vibrating through the alley's close walls. It lunged. Issei did not think. Years of quiet, patient training in the endless nothing of the gap took over before conscious thought had the chance to catch up, and the black armor unfolded around him in a rush of displaced air, scales gleaming faintly in the dim alley light, the jewel on the back of his gauntlet flaring bright as Kyushin's power surged through him. The stray devil's claws met his raised forearm and skidded off the armor with a shriek of failed impact, and Issei used the opening to drive his other fist forward, catching the creature squarely in its distended jaw hard enough to send it stumbling back into a stack of discarded crates. It's not especially strong, the dragon observed, almost clinically, as the creature righted itself and lunged again. Careless with its rebirth, most likely. Whoever it once served did a poor job of it. Issei sidestepped the second lunge, catching the creature's overextended arm and using its own momentum to slam it face first into the alley wall, hard enough that the brick cracked beneath the impact. It let out a final, gurgling shriek and dissolved, slowly, into a dark mist that dispersed into the evening air, leaving nothing behind but the faint, fading hum of dispersed devil magic and the ringing silence of the empty alley. Issei stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, the armor slowly receding back into nothing as his heartbeat gradually settled. It was the first time he had used Kyushin's power against a genuine threat, rather than in the quiet, controlled practice of the gap, and something about it, the reality of it, the weight of having just protected a street full of sleeping, oblivious humans from something that would have torn through them without a second thought, settled into him with a gravity he had not fully expected. "You could have called me," said a voice from the mouth of the alley, and Issei turned to find Rias standing there, Kiba a step behind her, both of them clearly having felt the disturbance, and moved to intercept it. Rias's eyes swept over the alley, the cracked brick, the faint lingering traces of dispersed mist, and then settled on Issei with an expression that was equal parts relief and something sharper, more assessing. "That was a stray devil. In my territory. I would have handled it. I was closer," Issei said simply. "It felt wrong to just walk past and wait for someone else to deal with it." Rias studied him for a long moment, and Issei watched something in her expression shift, some final, careful measure of him settling into place. "That's the second time you've made a choice like that," she said. "Choosing to protect people instead of walking away, even when it wasn't strictly your responsibility. Is that a problem?" "No," Rias said, and there was something almost warm in the way she said it, a softening Issei had not seen from her before. "It's the opposite of a problem, actually. It's exactly the kind of thing that makes me think, whatever your mother is planning, whatever she wants back from this town, maybe it doesn't have to end the way I was afraid it might." Issei held her gaze, feeling the last of the adrenaline finally drain out of him, replaced by something quieter, steadier. He thought of his mother's stillness, her patience, the careful way she had spent years preparing him for exactly this world without ever fully explaining what waited at the end of it. He thought of Matsuda's easy grin, and Akino's careful, searching smile, and Rias's steady, protective conviction, standing here in the middle of an alley in a town he had known for less than a month, already feeling less like unfamiliar territory and more, slowly, cautiously, like something close to a home of his own. "I hope you're right," he said quietly. "Because I meant what I said. I don't want this to end in a fight, if there's any other way through it." Somewhere far beyond the town, beyond the ordinary sky Issei still had not fully gotten used to seeing, in the vast, silent stillness of the dimensional gap, Ophis felt the faint, familiar echo of her son's power flare and settle, and something in her old, patient chest, something that had waited longer than the world itself for a reason worth caring about anything at all, curled a little tighter around the quiet, unshakable certainty that she had made the right choice in sending him. He was ready for this world. And soon enough, whether the world was ready for him or not, she would come to see, with her own eyes, exactly what her son had built for himself in the town that had once been hers. Chapter 6. Word of the stray devil spread quickly through channels Issei did not fully understand yet, the quiet, informal network of supernatural gossip that seemed to move through Ko Town beneath the surface of ordinary life the way water moves beneath ice. By the end of the week, he had been introduced, formally this time, to the rest of Rias's peerage over tea in the old-school building the devils used as their base of operations, a place that felt, despite its age, warmer and more lived in than anywhere Issei had spent time since leaving the Gap. "So you're the one who's been giving my king so much to think about," Kiba said, setting a cup down in front of Issei with the easy, practiced grace of someone used to hosting guests. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're the threat she was originally worried about." "High praise," Issei said, echoing, without quite meaning to, the same dry phrase his dragon liked to use. "He means it," Kaneko said quietly, from her seat near the window, not looking up from the small plate of sweets in front of her. It was, Issei realized, the first time she had willingly spoken to him directly since he had arrived in Ko, and something about the simple, unadorned honesty of it settled a small, unexpected warmth in his chest. Akino poured him more tea without being asked, her expression carrying its usual gentle amusement, though there was something sharper beneath it, something that had been there since the moment he had first mentioned his mother's name. "You handled the stray devil well," she said. "Cleanly. No wasted movement. Someone trained you carefully." "My mother's patient," Issei said. "When she teaches something, she makes sure it actually sticks." "I'd like to meet her someday," Akino said in a tone that was light on the surface and considerably more careful underneath it. Ophis is not exactly a common topic of conversation among devils. Most of what we know about her comes from very old, very cautious records. "She's not really the type to make social calls," Issei said, which was true enough, and let the subject rest there, aware that there was only so much he was willing to reveal about his mother's plans before he understood them more fully himself. Rias watched the exchange from her seat at the head of the small table, arms crossed, expression thoughtful in a way that told Issei she was turning over something larger than the immediate conversation. "I spoke with my brother," she said, after a moment, and the shift in the room was immediate, subtle but unmistakable, every member of her peerage straightening slightly at the mention. "Your brother," Issei repeated. "Surzex Lucifer," Rias said. "One of the 4 devil kings. I told him what you told me. About your mother, about what she says she once held here." She met Issei's eyes steadily. "He wants to meet you. Not as a threat. As a courtesy, and as a chance to understand what's coming before it arrives. I told him I'd ask you first, rather than simply arranging it without your knowledge." Issei sat with that for a long moment, feeling the weight of it settle into his chest alongside the low, steady hum of Kurishin, who had gone quiet and thoughtful in the back of his mind, the way it did whenever a decision mattered more than it first appeared to. "This is not a small offer," the dragon said finally. "A devil king does not extend a personal meeting lightly. It is respect, and it is also a message. He wants your mother to understand that the devils are watching, carefully, and that they are willing to talk before anything else." "Tell him I'll meet with him," Issei said. "I think my mother would want that too, honestly. She never said she wanted a war. Just what she says was taken from her." Something in Rias's shoulders eased, a tension Issei had not fully realized she was carrying until it loosened. "Good," she said. "I'll arrange it." "And Issei." She hesitated, just slightly, before continuing, her voice softer than the careful, measured tone she usually kept in front of her peerage. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you came to this town the way you did. Honestly, and looking for a way through this instead of straight at it. I don't think that was the easy choice, given who your mother is." "It's the only choice that made sense to me," Issei said. "She raised me to think things through. I'm not going to stop just because it might be easier not to." The tea session wound down not long after, the conversation drifting into easier, more ordinary territory, homework and weekend plans and Matsuda's increasingly elaborate theories about exactly what kind of complicated backstory Issei was still refusing to explain in full. It was, Issei thought, walking home that evening beneath a sky slowly darkening toward its first real autumn chill, a strange and unexpected kind of peace, sitting in a room full of devils who had every reason to see him as a threat, and finding instead something closer to the beginnings of an actual friendship. He did not know yet what waited for him in a formal meeting with the Devil King, or what his mother would make of the offer when he told her about it, or how much longer the fragile, careful peace he had built in this town would hold once the wider world beyond Koa's quiet streets learned exactly what, and who, had come to live within it. He knew only that he had made a promise to himself, standing in that alley with a stray devil dissolving into mist at his feet, and again in that quiet meeting over tea, to find a way through all of it that did not require anyone he had come to care about, human or devil or otherwise, to get hurt. Somewhere beyond the edges of the world, in the endless silent gray of the gap, his mother waited, patient as always, watching the faint, familiar thread of her son's presence grow steadily brighter, steadily stronger, and steadily more entangled with a town, and a family, and a peerage of devils she had once dismissed as beneath her notice. It would not be long now, she thought, before she came to see for herself exactly what he had built. And when she did, the quiet, careful balance Issei had worked so hard to hold together would be tested in ways either of them could yet fully imagine. Chapter 7. The meeting with Surzek's Lucifer took place not in the Underworld itself, as Issei had half expected, but in a quiet, warded sitting room within the old school building, arranged with a formality that felt, to Issei, almost gentle in its restraint. A low table. A pot of tea that Akino prepared with visible care. Soft afternoon light filtering through curtains that had clearly been chosen to make the room feel less like a diplomatic summit and more like a conversation between people who wanted, genuinely, to understand each other. Surzek himself was not what Issei had pictured. He had expected, given the weight of the title Devil King, someone cold and imposing, carrying himself the way his mother sometimes did, still and unreadable and vast. Instead, the man who stepped through the transportation circle in the corner of the room had long crimson hair much like his sister's, a warm, easy smile, and an aura that, though clearly immense once Issei let himself actually feel it, was held so carefully in check that it felt, on the surface, almost disarmingly ordinary. "So you're the one who's had my sister writing me increasingly interesting reports," Surzek said, settling onto a cushion across the low table with the unhurried comfort of someone entirely at ease in his own skin. "Issei, was it? Ophis's son." "That's me," Issei said, doing his best to match the easy tone even as Kurishin stirred low and watchful beneath his ribs. "Careful," the dragon murmured. "Warmth is not the same as harmlessness. He did not become a devil king by being simple." "I appreciate you agreeing to this," Surzek continued. "I know it would have been easier to simply avoid us entirely. Ophis has never been the type to seek out conversation, historically speaking." "She's not, usually," Issei admitted. "But she also raised me to think things through instead of just reacting. I figured a war nobody wanted wasn't worth starting over a misunderstanding, if there's a way to avoid it." Something in Surzek's expression warmed further at that, genuine approval rather than diplomatic performance. "That's a rare instinct, in my experience. Most beings with power like yours find it easier to reach for it first and ask questions later." He accepted the cup of tea Akino offered with a nod of thanks before continuing, his tone shifting into something more careful, more deliberate. "I'll be direct with you, since directness seems to be working well between us so far. My sister told me your mother believes something of hers was taken and hidden within this town's territory. I want to understand what that is, if you're willing to share what you know." Issei considered his answer carefully, aware of every set of eyes in the room, Rias watching with quiet attention from her seat beside her brother, Akino hovering near the tea service with her usual unreadable calm, Kiba and Kaneko positioned near the door with the loose readiness of people prepared to act if the conversation turned in a direction they did not like. "Honestly, I don't fully know yet," Issei admitted. "My mother's told me pieces, not the whole picture. She said this town sits on something that used to be hers, some kind of territory or foothold, before it was sealed away and claimed by someone else. She didn't say who did the sealing, or exactly how long ago it happened. Just that she wants it back." Surzek was quiet for a long moment, turning his teacup slowly between his hands, his expression thoughtful in a way that made Issei distinctly aware he was watching centuries of careful political instinct working through a problem in real time. "There are old records," Surzek said finally, predating even the Great War, of a seal placed somewhere in this region. "The details are fragmented, and much of what survived was written in language so old that even our best scholars argue over the translation. but the general shape of it describes a boundary marker, something meant to contain or restrict a presence considered too dangerous to leave unchecked. He set the cup down carefully. If your mother is right, and this town sits atop that seal, then it's possible the Gremory clan has been unknowingly guarding something that was never truly ours to begin with. You're saying you might have to give it back, Rias said slowly, and Issei could hear, beneath the careful diplomatic surface of her voice, the specific unease of someone confronting the idea that her family's foundation rested on something more complicated than she had ever been told. I'm saying, Surzex corrected gently, that I would rather understand the truth of it fully before anyone decides what should happen next. A seal placed to contain something dangerous is not something to dismantle carelessly, even if the being asking for it is neutral, and even if her son has, so far, given me every reason to trust his intentions. He looked to Issei directly. Would your mother be willing to meet with me herself? Not as an act of aggression, but as a conversation, the same as this one. I would rather resolve this with understanding than assumption, on both sides. Issei felt Kyushin go very still and thoughtful in the back of his mind, weighing the offer with the same careful deliberation Issei imagined his mother herself would use. That is not a small request, the dragon said quietly. Your mother has not concerned herself with the affairs of the three factions in longer than most of them have existed. If she agrees to sit across from a devil king and speak plainly, it will be the first time in a very long while that Ophis has chosen to be known, rather than simply feared from a distance. I'll ask her, Issei said. I can't promise she'll say yes. She doesn't really do things because someone asks nicely. But I think she'd rather understand what she's walking into than start something blind, same as you. That's all I could reasonably ask for, Surzex said, and the warmth returned fully to his expression, easy and genuine. In the meantime, I want you to know that you and your intentions are welcome here, as far as I'm concerned. My sister speaks highly of you, and she is not an easy person to impress. He glanced sideways at Rias, whose expression flickered briefly with something that looked almost like embarrassment before settling back into composure. I would rather build something stable between our two, let's say, households, than have this end the way so many old grievances between powerful beings tend to end. I'd rather that too, Issei said, and meant it, feeling something in his chest loosen slightly that he had not fully realized was tense until it eased. The meeting wound down not long after into lighter conversation, Surzex asking, with evident genuine curiosity rather than interrogation, what it had been like growing up in the dimensional gap, what Issei thought of human school, whether Matsuda and Motohama had any idea yet what their new friend was actually capable of. It was, strange as it felt to admit even to himself, one of the more comfortable conversations Issei had had since arriving in Ko, despite having walked into the room half expecting a confrontation. Before Surzex departed through the same shimmering transportation circle he had arrived through, he paused at the threshold and looked back at Issei with an expression that had shifted, subtly, into something more serious. One more thing, he said. The fallen angels have taken an interest in this town recently. More than usual. I don't yet know why, but given everything we've just discussed, I would ask you to be careful. If your mother's seal is real, and if word of it has reached ears beyond this room, you may not be the only one interested in whatever it's protecting. Issei felt a small, cold thread of unease settle into his chest at that, echoed a heartbeat later by Kyushin's low, watchful hum. I'll keep an eye out, he said. Please do, Surzex said, and then, with a final warm smile that did nothing to soften the seriousness of the warning he had just delivered, he stepped through the circle and was gone, leaving the quiet room, and the 5 people left standing in it, to sit with the weight of everything that had just been said. Chapter 8. Issei relayed the entire conversation to his mother that night, sitting alone in his small apartment with his eyes closed, reaching out along the quiet, familiar thread that had always connected them, even across the vast distance separating Ko from the endless gray of the gap. Ophis listened without interrupting, the way she always did, and when he finally finished, there was a long silence on the other end of that thread, long enough that Issei almost wondered if she had simply drifted away mid-conversation, lost in some private thought the way she sometimes did. He wants to meet me, she said finally, and something in the flat, careful tone of it was harder to read than usual. That's what he said? He didn't push for it. Just asked if you'd be willing? Another long silence. I have not sat across from anyone claiming a title in longer than that title has existed, Ophis said. It is not something I have ever had reason to want. You don't have to, Issei said carefully. I told him I'd ask, not that you'd say yes. I know. A pause, softer this time. But you handled the conversation well. Better than I might have, if I am honest. You found the shape of an understanding without giving away more than you needed to. There was something in the way she said it, quiet and careful, that Issei recognized, after 16 years of learning to read every small shift in his mother's stillness, as pride. I will consider it. The seal is old, Issei, and it was not placed carelessly. If Surzex wishes to understand what it protects before deciding what to do about it, that is not an unreasonable position for him to take, even if it delays what I want. He also said something else, Issei said, and felt the thread between them sharpen slightly with his mother's attention as he relayed the warning about the fallen angels. He didn't know exactly why they're interested. Just that it's more than usual, and that it might be connected to all this. Ophis was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had cooled, gone flat and careful in the specific way it always did when something genuinely concerned her. The fallen have always been opportunists, she said. If word has reached them that something old and powerful may soon be unsealed in that town, they will not wait patiently for devils and dragons to negotiate terms. They will try to claim it first, or destroy it, whichever serves them better. A pause. Be careful, Issei. I did not send you into that world to have you caught in the middle of a scramble between factions that see you only as a means to an end. I will be, Issei said, and meant it, though some old, familiar warmth settled into his chest at the clear, unmistakable concern beneath his mother's careful words. I've got people here now who'd help, if it came to that. Rias and her peerage. Even her brother, it sounds like. Good, Ophis said simply, and there was something almost like relief in the single word, brief and quickly folded away again beneath her usual composure. I am glad you are not alone out there. That was never something I could fully give you myself, no matter how much I wanted to. The conversation ended not long after, the thread between them settling back into its familiar quiet, and Issei sat alone in the dark of his apartment for a long while afterward, turning over everything that had been said, feeling the weight of a warning that had gone from abstract possibility to something far more immediate and real. He did not have to wait long to understand exactly what his mother had meant. It was 3 days later, walking home from school alone, that Issei first felt it, a cold, oily presence brushing against the edges of his senses, entirely unlike the clean, ancient hum of devil power he had grown used to feeling from Rias and her peerage. This was sharper, colder, carrying an edge that reminded him, uncomfortably, of a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. Fallen angel, Kurishin said, its earlier amusement entirely gone, replaced by something flat and alert. Close. Watching, rather than approaching. Careful, Issei. This one is testing the water before deciding whether to wade in. Issei kept walking, forcing his pace to stay steady and unhurried despite the prickling awareness crawling up the back of his neck, and let his senses drift outward, cataloging the presence without turning to look for it directly. It followed him for 3 blocks, always at the edge of his perception, never quite close enough to be certain, before it finally faded away entirely, as suddenly as it had appeared. He told Rias about it the next morning, catching her before class in the quiet stretch of hallway near the student council room, and watched her expression sharpen into the same careful focus she had worn during their very first conversation on the rooftop. That matches what my brother told me, she said. There's been increased fallen angel activity across the whole district, not just around you specifically. But if one of them followed you personally, that's not a coincidence. They know what you are, or at least suspect it. Great, Issei muttered. So now I've got devils, my own mother, and apparently fallen angels all interested in the same open secret. Welcome to being interesting, Rias said, with the faint, dry humor that had grown more frequent between them over the past weeks. Then her expression sobered again. I want you to be careful. Truly careful, Issei, not just polite caution. The fallen who operate in gray territory like this, outside official Grigori sanction, tend to be the ones with the least to lose and the most willingness to take risks. If one of them decides you're worth the danger of provoking your mother, they won't hesitate simply because it's reckless. I hear you, Issei said. I'm not planning on wandering into anything blind. Good, Rias said. Because if something happens, I want you to call for help instead of trying to handle it alone. That's not me doubting your strength. It's me telling you that you're not alone in this anymore, whether you fully believe that yet or not. Issei looked at her for a long moment, something in her steady, direct sincerity settling warmly into a part of him that had spent his entire life, before believing he had exactly one person in the world he could rely on. Thanks, he said finally, quiet and genuine. I mean that. Don't thank me yet, Rias said, though there was a small, real smile tucked into the corner of her expression as she said it. Thank me after we've actually gotten through whatever's coming. Neither of them knew yet, standing together in that quiet hallway with the morning bell not far off, exactly how soon that test would arrive, or the shape it would take when it finally did. Chapter 9. He found her at the old, half-forgotten shrine on the edge of town, the one Matsuda had once pointed out on a walk home, joking about how it was probably haunted. Issei had not been looking for anything in particular that evening, simply walking to clear his head after a long day of classes, when Kurishin stirred sharply in his chest, alert in a way that had nothing to do with fallen angels or devils. There is someone there, the dragon said. Human but strange. Something old and sacred is wrapped around her, though she does not seem to understand what it is herself. Issei followed the pull of it up the shrine's worn stone steps and found a girl sitting alone on the edge of the old wooden platform, blonde hair falling loose around her shoulders, dressed in clothes that looked foreign to the town, a simple traveling habit that marked her, even to Issei's untrained eye, as belonging to some branch of the church. She looked up at his approach with wide, startled green eyes, and something in her expression, a kind of careful, practiced fear, the look of someone used to being unwelcome, made Issei slow his steps and soften his voice before he spoke. Sorry, he said. Didn't mean to startle you. I just felt like someone was up here. You felt me? The girl asked, and there was something in the phrasing, something faintly hopeful and faintly afraid at once, that made Issei tilt his head, curious despite himself. Something like that, he said. I'm Issei. Asia, she said quietly. Asia Argento. She hesitated, glancing down at her own folded hands before continuing, her voice small. I am not from here. I only arrived a few days ago. I do not know very many people yet. Issei sat down a careful distance away on the shrine steps, letting the silence stretch comfortably rather than pushing for more than she seemed ready to give. After a long moment, Asia spoke again, quieter still. I used to heal people, she said. In my old parish. It was the only thing I was ever good at. But then one day the injury I healed belonged to someone the church did not approve of, and after that, everything changed. Her hands twisted together in her lap. They called it heresy. They sent me away. I do not have anywhere else to go, so I came here, because it was as far from everything I used to know as I could manage. Something in Issei's chest tightened at the quiet, practiced resignation in her voice, the way she spoke about being cast aside as though it were simply an unfortunate fact of weather rather than a cruelty done to her. He thought of his own mother, vast and strange and endlessly patient, who had built an entire childhood around making certain he never once had to feel the particular loneliness this girl was clearly carrying alone. That's a rotten thing to do to someone, he said simply. Helping people shouldn't get you punished. Asia looked up at him, something cautiously surprised in her expression, as though she had expected a different reaction entirely. You are not afraid of what I am? Of the sacred gear I carry? You should tell her the truth, Kurishin murmured. She is not the type to be frightened by honesty. And she deserves better than more secrets, given everything she has already lost to them. I'm not exactly a normal guy myself, Issei admitted. I've got something a lot like that living inside me too. A dragon, actually. So no, I'm not really in a position to be afraid of sacred gears. Asia's eyes widened, and for the first time since he had found her, something like a real, unguarded smile broke through the careful sadness of her expression. A dragon, she repeated, wonder creeping into her voice despite everything. I have never met anyone else who carried something like that. They talked for a long while after that, the sky slowly darkening overhead, Asia gradually relaxing out of her careful, practiced fear as Issei asked easy questions about where she had traveled from and what she liked, rather than pressing on the parts of her story that clearly still hurt. It was, he realized somewhere in the middle of that conversation, the first time since arriving in Ko that he had found someone who understood, even partially, exactly what it felt like to carry something powerful and strange inside an otherwise ordinary body, and to wonder, quietly, whether that made you a danger to the people around you or simply someone who needed to be a little more careful with how you let yourself be known. The cold, oily presence returned just as the last light was fading from the sky. Issei felt it a full second before Asia gasped, scrambling back from the shrine steps with wide, terrified eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the tree line, where a figure had begun to emerge, dark wings unfolding slowly from her back, violet light gathering at her fingertips in the shape of something sharp and deliberately cruel. Well, the fallen angel said, her voice carrying an idle, cutting amusement that did nothing to soften the danger radiating off her, isn't this convenient? I was hoping to find the little healer alone, but it seems I've stumbled onto something even more interesting. Her eyes settled on Issei, sharp and assessing. The Black Dragon Emperor. Ophis's little pet, wandering around unsupervised. You've got quite the bounty on your head in certain circles, you know. Issei stepped smoothly between the fallen angel and Asia, feeling curiosity surge forward in his chest, coiled and ready. I'm going to guess you're not here to introduce yourself politely, he said. Clever boy, the fallen angel said, her smile sharpening. I don't particularly care about you, actually, not tonight. I'm here for her. Her gaze flicked past him to where Asia crouched, frozen, behind him. That sacred gear of hers is worth quite a lot to the right buyer, and a heretic outcast with nowhere to run makes for very easy pickings. But since you're here, I suppose I could take you too. Double the reward. Not happening, Issei said, and the black armor unfolded around him in a rush of displaced air, scales catching the fading light, the jewel on his gauntlet flaring bright as Kyushin's power surged fully awake. The fallen angel's eyes widened, just slightly, genuine surprise flickering behind her earlier confidence, before her expression hardened back into cold calculation. So the rumors were true, she murmured. Fine then. I'll enjoy the challenge. She struck first, a spear of condensed violet light hurled with vicious speed, and Issei threw himself sideways, dragging Asia further back behind the shelter of the old shrine's wooden pillar, as the light spear shattered against the stone steps behind them in an explosion of splinters and dust. Stay down, he told Asia, and did not wait for her answer before pushing off the ground and closing the distance toward the fallen angel, black-armored fist driving forward with the full weight of Kyushin's power behind it. She dodged, barely, twisting aside with the fluid grace of centuries of practiced combat, and answered with a wide, slashing arc of violet light that Issei caught on his raised forearm, the armor absorbing most of the impact even as the force of it drove him back a step. Not bad, the fallen angel said, hovering back out of immediate reach, wings beating slowly to keep her airborne. But I've fought heavenly dragons before, little one. You'll need more than raw strength to actually land a hit on me. Then let us give her more, Kyushin said, and Issei felt the dragon's power surge deeper, sharper, the jewel on his gauntlet pulsing once, twice, in a rhythm that felt, for the first time, like something building toward more than simple brute force. The fallen angel's eyes widened as Issei surged forward again, faster this time, closing the gap before she could fully retreat, and this time when his fist connected, it was with enough force behind it to send her crashing backward through the tree line in a shower of broken branches and scattered leaves. She did not get back up immediately, and in the ringing silence that followed, Issei stood over her, breathing hard, the black armor humming steady and warm around him, and understood, with a clarity that settled deep into his chest, exactly how much more dangerous the world beyond the gap had just become, and exactly how much he was going to have to grow, and quickly, to keep the people he had started to care about safe within it. Chapter 10. The fallen angel did not stay down for long. By the time Issei turned back to check on Asia, still crouched, pale and shaking, behind the shattered remains of the shrine's wooden pillar, the sound of beating wings told him their attacker had already recovered enough to retreat, vanishing into the darkening sky with a final, furious glare thrown back over her shoulder that promised, wordlessly, this was not finished. Are you hurt? Issei asked, letting the armor recede back into nothing as he crossed quickly to Asia's side, kneeling down to her level. No, Asia said, though her voice trembled, her hands still pressed tightly together in front of her. I am not hurt. But you fought her. Because of me. Because she was trying to hurt you, Issei corrected gently. That's not the same thing as being your fault. Asia looked up at him, and something in her wide green eyes carried a raw, uncertain hope that made Issei's chest ache with an unfamiliar tenderness, the specific ache of watching someone brace themselves for abandonment, and slowly beginning to believe it might not come after all. No one has ever fought for me before, she said quietly. Not like that. I did not think anyone would. Well, I did, Issei said simply. And I'm not planning on leaving you out here alone after what just happened. You need somewhere safe to stay, and people around you who'll actually look out for you. I know some people who might be able to help with both. He brought her to the old school building that night, Asia trailing close behind him with the careful, uncertain steps of someone unused to being led somewhere with kindness rather than suspicion, and found Rias and her peerage already gathered, alerted, Issei quickly learned, by the flare of supernatural conflict that had rippled through the town's wards the moment the fallen angel had attacked. You're not hurt, Rias said, relief plain in her voice as she took in Issei's appearance, before her gaze shifted, sharp and assessing, to the pale, nervous girl standing just behind him. And you brought company. This is Asia, Issei said. The fallen angel was after her sacred gear. She doesn't have anywhere else to go, and I wasn't about to just walk away and hope she'd be fine on her own. Rias studied Asia for a long moment, and Issei watched something in her expression soften as she took in the girl's traveling habit, the careful, practiced fear still lingering in her posture, the unmistakable marks of someone who had been cast aside by people who should have protected her. You carry twilight healing, Rias said finally, not a question. I've heard of it. A very rare sacred gear. I understand now why the fallen would want it. Please, Asia said, her voice small but steady, I do not want to cause trouble for anyone. I only wanted somewhere quiet to be, until I decided what to do next. You won't be trouble, Rias said, and there was something firm and decisive in the way she said it that reminded Issei, not for the first time, exactly why an entire peerage of devils had chosen to follow her without hesitation. This town is my family's territory. That means I'm responsible for the people in it, and that includes you now, if you're willing to stay. I can offer you a place here, protection, somewhere to belong, if that's something you want. Asia's eyes filled with tears, sudden and overwhelmed, and she pressed both hands over her mouth for a moment before she could speak again. You would do that? For someone you only just met? Issei vouched for you, Rias said simply. That's enough for me. It was, Issei thought, watching the quiet, careful kindness of that exchange unfold, exactly the kind of thing his mother had spent years quietly hoping he would find in the world beyond the gap, though she had never said so outright. Not power, not territory, not the resolution of whatever old grievance sat sealed beneath this town. Just people, ordinary and extraordinary at once, choosing to make room for each other simply because it was the right thing to do. Asia stayed that night in a spare room within the old school building, and by the following week, with Rias's careful guidance and the quiet support of a peerage that had, almost without discussion, decided to fold the gentle, healing-hearted girl into their circle, she had begun, tentatively, to smile more easily, to laugh at Matsuda's increasingly ridiculous jokes when Issei brought her along to lunch, to speak without the careful, practiced fear that had marked her that first night at the shrine. The fallen angel did not return immediately, though the cold, watchful edge of her presence lingered at the periphery of Issei's senses more than once over the following weeks, patient and calculating, clearly waiting for a better opportunity than a direct confrontation with an angry heavenly dragon had proven to be. She'll come back, Rias said, one evening as they sat together on the roof, the autumn air sharp with the promise of winter not far off. Fallen who operate like that don't give up just because their first attempt failed. She'll wait, regroup, maybe bring allies next time. I figured as much, Issei said. I'm not planning on being caught off guard again. I know, Rias said. You've gotten stronger just in the weeks since you got here. I don't think you fully realize how much. She glanced sideways at him, something thoughtful in her expression. My brother's still waiting on word about whether your mother will agree to meet him. Have you asked her again? Not yet, Issei admitted. I think she's still turning it over. She doesn't rush decisions like that. He was quiet for a moment, watching the last of the daylight fade over the rooftops of the town that had, somehow, in the space of just over a month, begun to feel less like unfamiliar territory and more like something worth protecting in its own right. But after tonight, after what almost happened to Asia, I think I'm going to push a little harder. If the Fallen are getting bold enough to attack people in the open like that, I'd rather have my mother and your brother talking sooner instead of later. Rias nodded slowly, and for a long moment they simply sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken fully overhead, both of them aware, in their own quiet ways, that whatever peace they had managed to build in this small, ordinary-seeming town was standing on ground far more fragile, and far more valuable, than either of them had first realized. Chapter 11. Ophis agreed to the meeting 11 days later, delivering her answer through the quiet thread that always connected her to Issei with a simplicity that felt, in its own way, like an enormous concession from a being who had spent the whole of her existence needing to answer to no one. Tell the Devil King I will come, she said. But I will come to the town itself. I have not set foot therein longer than his entire species has existed. It is time I looked at what has become of it, with my own eyes rather than through yours. The meeting was arranged for the following weekend, in the clearing at the center of the old shrine grounds where Issei had first found Asia, a location chosen carefully by Surzex as neutral ground, sacred enough to hold significance, and remote enough to avoid drawing attention from the town's ordinary human residents. Issei had not fully prepared himself for what it would feel like to watch his mother step out of a tear in the world and into the place she claimed as once, long ago, her own. She looked, as always, unassuming at first glance, small and still in a plain black dress, her long dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, her expression as flat and unreadable as it had always been throughout Issei's entire childhood. But the moment her feet touched the ground of the shrine clearing, the air itself seemed to hold its breath, every ordinary sound of insects and wind falling suddenly, completely silent, as though the whole of the town had paused to acknowledge exactly what had just arrived within it. Surzex, waiting with Rias and a small contingent of her peerage at the clearing's edge, inclined his head with careful, deliberate respect. Ophis, he said. Thank you for agreeing to this. Ophis studied him for a long moment, her gaze unblinking, before her attention drifted, slow and deliberate, across the clearing itself, taking in the old shrine, the surrounding trees, the faint, worn traces of the town visible beyond the tree line. This place has changed, she said finally, not quite in answer to Surzex's greeting. It was quieter once. Before your kind claimed it. I understand this territory carries history I wasn't fully aware of, Surzex said carefully. That's part of why I wanted this conversation. I'd rather understand what was here before my family's claim, and what you believe still belongs to you, before either of us decides how to move forward. Ophis was quiet for a long moment, and Issei, standing a careful distance away beside Rias, watched his mother's stillness in a way he had never quite had reason to before, aware for the first time of exactly how strange and enormous she must look to everyone else in that clearing, this small, quiet woman who carried, beneath her flat and unremarkable exterior, power that could unmake the world if she ever chose to use it fully. There is a fragment of the gap sealed beneath this ground, Ophis said finally. Not a large one. Small enough that it has likely gone unnoticed by everyone who has lived here since it was placed. But it was mine, a piece of the infinite carried into this world long before your factions drew their careful borders across it, and it was sealed away by beings who feared what it represented rather than understanding it. Sealed by whom? Surzex asked. Angels, Ophis said, and something in the single flat word carried an old, cold weight that made the whole clearing feel, briefly, colder. Long before the Great War divided your three factions as they stand now. They found the fragment, decided it was a threat to the order they wished to build, and buried it beneath layers of restrictive magic strong enough to hold even against time itself. I did not contest it then. I had little interest in this world at the time, and even less interest in a war over so small a piece of what I already possessed in infinite supply elsewhere. Her gaze settled on Issei, brief and unreadable. I have more reason to want it back now. Serzex followed her gaze to Issei, and something in his expression shifted, understanding settling into place. Because of him, he said. You want to strengthen this place, or protect it, because your son has chosen to make a life here. He has chosen to build something here, Ophis corrected. Friendships. Trust. A place he might, in time, call home rather than simply a task I set him to complete. I did not expect that when I sent him. I find I do not object to it either. Her attention returned fully to Serzex. I do not ask you to return it out of threat, Devil King. I ask because I believe you are the kind of leader who would rather resolve this honestly than force a confrontation over something so easily settled through conversation. Serzex was quiet for a long moment, weighing the offer with the same careful deliberation Issei had watched him bring to every part of their earlier meeting, before he inclined his head again, more deeply this time. I'll need to consult my council before I can formally agree to unsealing anything on Gremory territory, he said. That's not evasion, only honesty about how these decisions are properly made among my people. But personally, I see no reason to keep something from you that was never truly ours to hold, especially not when releasing it might strengthen the safety of a town my sister has sworn to protect. That is a reasonable answer, Ophis said, and something in her flat tone, subtle as it was, carried what Issei recognized, after years of learning to read every small shift in his mother's stillness, as genuine approval. The formal conversation wound down not long after, shifting into more practical discussion of timelines and precautions, and Issei found himself, throughout all of it, watching his mother with a strange, quiet wonder he had never quite had cause to feel before. He had grown up believing her stillness was simply the whole of what she was, vast and unchanging and complete. Watching her now, standing in the clearing that had once been hers, speaking plainly with the Devil King about a fragment of infinity she had waited centuries to reclaim not for her own sake but for his, Issei understood, with a clarity that settled warm and unexpected into his chest, that his mother had changed more than either of them had ever openly admitted, and that whatever she had once been before he existed, she was no longer only that. As the meeting finally drew to its close, Ophis lingered a moment longer beside Issei, her hand resting briefly against the side of his face in the same rare, tender gesture she had offered him before he first stepped through the tear into this world. You have built something good here, she said quietly, for his ears alone. I am proud of you, Issei. I do not think I have said that plainly enough, in all this time. You don't have to say it for me to know, Issei said, though something in his throat tightened at hearing it all the same. Perhaps not, Ophis agreed. But some things are worth saying regardless. She studied him a moment longer, something almost warm flickering behind her usual stillness, before she stepped back toward the quiet golden seam already opening behind her. Be careful of the fallen who attacked your friend. They will not simply give up because their first attempt failed. And Issei. She paused at the threshold of the tear, looking back at him one final time. Whatever comes next, know that I am not far. I never have been. She stepped through, and the tear sealed shut behind her, leaving the shrine clearing quiet once more, the ordinary sounds of insects and wind slowly returning as though the whole of the town had finally allowed itself to exhale. Issei stood there for a long moment afterward, feeling the lingering weight of everything that had just been said and decided, and became gradually aware of Rias standing quietly beside him, watching him with an expression that held none of the earlier wariness that had first defined their conversations, only something steady and warm and entirely new. She's not at all what I expected, Rias said softly. She's not what most people expect, Issei agreed. Took me a while to understand her too, honestly. And I had my whole childhood to work with. Rias smiled, small and genuine, and together they turned to follow the others back toward the town, the last of the daylight fading gently behind them, carrying with it the quiet, settled certainty that whatever waited next, fallen angels or sealed fragments of infinity, or the slow, careful work of building an actual life in a world that had never once been simple, they would not have to face it alone. Chapter 12. The fallen angel returned 8 days later, and this time, she did not come alone. Issei felt them before he saw them, 3 distinct points of that same cold, oily presence converging on the outskirts of town just as the last light of a gray, overcast afternoon began to fade. He was walking home from a study session with Matsuda and Motohama, the easy, ordinary warmth of an afternoon spent arguing over homework and video games still settled comfortably in his chest, when Kurishin went suddenly, sharply alert. 3 of them, the dragon said. The one from before, and 2 more. Stronger than her, if I am reading this correctly. This is not a second attempt at the same plan, Issei. This is retaliation. Issei broke away from his friends with a hurried excuse about forgetting something at the shrine, ignoring Matsuda's confused protest, and moved quickly toward the source of the gathering presence, already reaching for the quiet thread that connected him to Rias, sending along it the same wordless flare of urgency he had learned, over the past weeks, could carry a warning faster than words ever could. He found them in the same clearing where his mother had stood only a week before, the old shrine's worn wooden steps now framed by 3 winged figures, the fallen angel from before standing at the center, flanked by a tall man with cold, calculating eyes and a shorter woman whose expression carried a hungry, eager cruelty that made Issei's skin prickle the moment he stepped into the clearing. There he is, the woman from before said, her earlier confident amusement sharpened now into something colder. I told you he'd come running the moment he felt us. Predictable. You're not exactly subtle, Issei said, forcing his voice steady despite the way his pulse had kicked into a hard, urgent rhythm. 3 of you this time. Guess my mother's visit last week made an impression. The tall man stepped forward, his expression unreadable, cold and clinical in a way that unsettled Issei more than the woman's open hostility had. Ophis has not shown herself in this world in longer than most records account for, he said. And now, within the space of a month, she has a son walking openly among devils, and she herself has apparently agreed to sit and negotiate with the Devil King like some minor territorial dispute. That is not a small thing, boy. That is the kind of shift that makes certain parties in the Gregory very interested in understanding exactly what you are, and exactly how much of your mother's power you actually carry. You're not getting an answer to that, Issei said, and let the black armor unfold around him, scales catching the fading gray light, the jewel on his gauntlet pulsing steady and bright. We weren't really asking, the tall man said, and light spears bloomed simultaneously at all 3 sets of fingertips, violet and cold and sharp. Issei moved first, closing the distance toward the woman before either of the others could fully commit to an angle of attack, driving a black armored fist toward her center mass. She twisted aside at the last possible instant, faster than her earlier counterpart had managed, and Issei felt the graze of a light spear along his shoulder, the armor absorbing most of the force but not all of it, a sharp, hot line of pain blooming where the edge had caught him. This is a different fight than last time, Kurishin warned, its tone sharpening with genuine concern. 3 coordinated opponents, at least 2 of them stronger than the one you beat before. You cannot simply overpower this, Issei. You will need to be smarter than that. Issei twisted away from a second spear thrown by the tall man, rolling across the clearing's packed earth and coming back up in a defensive crouch, cataloging the positions of all 3 attackers with the fast, careful assessment his mother had spent years drilling into him during their long hours of practice in the gap. They were spreading out, he realized, angling to surround him rather than press a direct assault, patient and methodical in a way that told him clearly this was not the reckless overconfidence of their first encounter. He did not have long to plan a counter. The clearing exploded a heartbeat later into motion, crimson light flaring bright at the tree line as Rias arrived, Kiba and Akino flanking her, Kaneko already moving fast and low toward the tall man's flank before any of the 3 fallen had fully registered the new arrivals. You're not the only ones who can bring backup, Rias said, her voice carrying the cold, sharp authority of a great house heir standing on her own territory, power gathering visibly around her in a dark, roiling aura that made even the tall man's cold composure flicker, briefly, with something like caution. The fight that followed was fast and brutal and mercifully brief. Kaneko closed the distance on the tall man before he could reorient, a single, precise strike from her enhanced strength sending him crashing back into the tree line hard enough to crack the trunk he collided with. Kiba engaged the eager, cruel-eyed woman with the fluid, economical grace of a trained swordsman, his blade a blur of motion that kept her constantly on the defensive, unable to find the opening her earlier confidence had assumed would come easily. Akino's lightning split the gray sky overhead, a warning strike that scorched the earth just short of the original fallen angel's feet, driving her back several steps with an expression that had finally, fully, shed its earlier amusement. Issei used the opening to close the last of the distance, and this time, when his fist connected, there was nothing left for her to dodge into, the full weight of Kurishin's power driving her down hard into the packed earth of the clearing floor. Enough, she gasped, pinned beneath the weight of his gauntlet pressed carefully but firmly against her collarbone. Not enough force to seriously injure, but more than enough to make continued resistance pointless. Enough, we're finished, called them off. Issei glanced up to find the tall man already retreating into the tree line, dragging his cruel-eyed companion with him, both of them clearly recalculating the odds of a fight they had entered expecting to be far more one-sided than it had turned out to be. He looked back down at the woman pinned beneath him, weighing, for a long moment, exactly what to do with her. Tell whoever sent you, he said finally, releasing the pressure of his gauntlet, and stepping back to let her scramble upright, that if they come after my friends again, my mother won't be nearly as patient about it as I am. The fallen angel did not answer, only cast one last, unreadable look at him before launching herself skyward and vanishing into the gray, overcast evening, leaving the clearing quiet once more, the five of them standing together amid the scorched earth and broken tree branches, breathing hard in the sudden, ringing stillness. You called for help, Rias said, and there was something warm and approving in the way she said it, cutting through the last of the adrenaline still humming through Issei's chest. I wasn't sure you actually would, if it came down to it. You told me not to try handling it alone, Issei said, managing a tired, genuine smile despite the ache still radiating from the shallow cut along his shoulder. Figured I should probably start listening to good advice when I hear it. Smart man, Akino said, already moving to inspect the cut with the same careful, competent attention she brought to everything, while Kiba sheathed his blade and Kaneko dusted debris from her school uniform with quiet, unbothered efficiency, as though driving off 3 fallen angels was simply another Tuesday's work. It was, Issei thought, standing together with them in the fading gray light of that battered clearing, exactly what his mother had wanted for him when she first sent him through the tear into this world. Not simply strength enough to survive whatever came for him, though he had that now too, hard-won and still growing. Something steadier, and rarer, and far more valuable than raw power alone. People who came running when he called. Chapter 13. Surzex's formal response came less than a week after the clearing had scorched and settled, delivered not through Rias this time but in person, the Devil King stepping through a transportation circle into the old school building with an expression that carried both apology and resolve in equal measure. The council has agreed, he said, without preamble. Once the room had gathered, Issei and Rias's full peerage assembled around the same low table where their first conversation had taken place. Not without argument, I'll admit. Some of the older members were reluctant to unseal anything without a full generation of study first. But when I explained what happened here last week, that fallen angels had already grown bold enough to attack openly on our territory over rumors of what might be sealed beneath it, the argument for delay lost most of its weight rather quickly. So you'll release it, Issei said? The fragment. My mother's. With her presence required for the unsealing itself, Surzex confirmed. The magic involved is old enough, and strange enough, that we'd rather not attempt it without the one who originally lost it standing there to guide the process. I'll admit, the scholars I've spoken with are almost as curious to see it done properly as they are cautious about doing it at all. Issei felt a small, genuine warmth settle into his chest at that, the sense of a long, careful negotiation finally bending toward resolution rather than conflict. I'll let her know, he said. I think she'll be glad to hear it went this way instead of the alternative. So am I, Surzex said, and something in his easy, warm expression suggested he meant it fully, the diplomatic caution of their earlier meetings settling into something closer to genuine goodwill. For what it's worth, Issei, I think this entire situation could have gone very differently, with a different young dragon standing where you are. I'm glad it was you instead. The unsealing itself took place a week later, in the same shrine clearing that had already borne witness to so much over the past 2 months, this time gathered with a wider audience than before. Ophis stood at the center of the clearing, Surzex and a small delegation of devil scholars positioned respectfully at its edge, Rias and her full peerage present as witnesses, and Asia standing close beside Issei, her earlier fear entirely replaced now by wide, wondering curiosity at the prospect of watching magic older than recorded history unfold in front of her. Ophis raised one hand, and the air above the clearing's worn stone platform began to shimmer, old layered wards flickering into visibility one by one as her presence unwound them with a patience that felt, to Issei's careful eye, less like force and more like a long overdue conversation between old, familiar magics finally being allowed to conclude. The final layer dissolved with a sound like a held breath finally released, and for a moment, the clearing filled with a strange, soft light, gray and infinite and endlessly deep, a fragment of the dimensional gap itself made visible in the heart of an ordinary shrine on the edge of an ordinary town. It did not explode outward, or reshape the land around it the way Issei had half feared it might. It simply settled, quiet and vast, folding itself gently back into the ground beneath the shrine, a permanent, subtle thread connecting this small corner of the world back to the endless nothing Issei had spent his childhood inside. "It is done," Ophis said, lowering her hand, her flat voice carrying, for once, something unmistakably close to satisfaction. "This place will carry a piece of the infinite again, quiet and hidden, the way it always should have. I do not ask that you understand what that means fully, Devil King. Only that you respect it." "I will," Surzex said, bowing his head with genuine, unhurried respect. "Thank you, Ophis, for trusting us enough to let this happen the way it did." Ophis studied him a long moment, and then, almost imperceptibly, inclined her head in return, the smallest gesture of acknowledgement Issei had ever seen her offer to anyone outside their small, quiet family of 2. "Thank my son," she said. "This resolution exists because of the trust he built here, not because of anything I did myself." She turned to Issei then, and something in her expression, warm and quiet and unmistakably proud, settled deep into his chest as she reached out and rested her hand briefly against the side of his face, the same gesture she had offered him at the very beginning of all this, before he had ever stepped through the tear into a world he had once known only through careful lessons and second-hand fragments of memory. "You have done well," she said. "Better than I hoped, when I sent you here. I think, perhaps, I underestimated exactly how much you would grow, given the chance." "I had good teachers," Issei said, glancing sideways at Rias, at Asia, at the whole quiet, gathered circle of people who had, in the space of 2 short months, become something far more permanent in his life than he had ever expected when he first stepped, alone and uncertain, through a golden seam of light into an unfamiliar world. "You included." Ophis's expression softened further, something almost like a real smile ghosting at the edge of her usually flat composure there and gone so quickly that Issei might have imagined it, except that he knew, after a lifetime spent learning every small shift in his mother's stillness, that he had not. "I will not be far," she said, echoing the same words she always offered before stepping back through a tear in the world, though this time, standing in the clearing that held a piece of her restored and settled quietly beneath it, the words carried less the weight of distance and more the simple, steady comfort of a promise already kept. "Whatever comes next, Issei, know that this town, and everyone in it who has chosen to stand beside you, has my gratitude as well as my protection." She stepped back through the golden light, and the tear sealed shut behind her, leaving the clearing bathed in the soft, ordinary gray of an overcast afternoon once more, the fragment of infinity now settled quietly, permanently, beneath the old worn stones of the shrine. Issei stood there for a long moment amid the gathered circle of devils and one quiet, healing-hearted former nun who had, each in their own way, become something like family to him in the short time since he had first arrived, and felt, for the first time since stepping through that golden seam of light 2 months before, the full, settled weight of exactly what he had built for himself in this small, ordinary-seeming town. A home. Not the endless, patient stillness of the gap, though he would always carry that with him too, folded quietly into the corner of himself that would never stop being his mother's son. Something new. Something chosen, and fought for, and worth protecting with everything Kurishin's ancient, patient power could offer. He did not know yet what waited beyond this quiet resolution, what other factions might take interest now that word of a heavenly dragon walking openly among devils had surely begun to spread, or what deeper history still lay coiled and waiting in the wider world beyond Koa's borders. He knew only that whatever came next, he would not be facing it alone, and that his mother, wherever she waited in the vast, silent stillness of the gap, would never again be quite so far away as she had always seemed before. Chapter 14. Life in Ko settled, in the weeks that followed the unsealing, into something Issei had never quite let himself imagine wanting before he arrived there. Ordinary mornings that no longer felt quite so overwhelming. Lunches on the school roof that had become as much a fixture of his week as class itself, Matsuda and Motohama's easy chaos blending, more often than not, with Asia's quiet laughter and Rias's dry, fond commentary on all of it. Evenings spent training in the clearing above the newly restored fragment of the gap, Kurishin's power growing steadier and more refined under his mother's occasional, careful guidance, delivered now not only through the quiet thread between them but sometimes, when she judged the moment worth the effort, in brief, unannounced visits that no longer startled Rias's peerage the way they once had. "She actually smiled at me last time," Rias said one evening, sitting beside Issei on the shrine steps as the sun set gently over the town below them. "Your mother, I mean." "It was small, but I saw it." "She does that more now," Issei said. "I don't think she used to before all this. I think maybe she didn't have much reason to." Rias was quiet for a moment, watching the last light fade over the rooftops. "Do you think this is what she wanted, when she sent you here? Not just the fragment back, but this?" "All of it." Issei considered the question carefully, turning it over the way he had learned to turn over everything that mattered, slowly and completely, before he answered. "I think she wanted me to understand the world," he said finally. "I don't think she fully expected I'd end up building a home in the middle of it. But I don't think she minds that it happened that way either." Not everyone beyond the borders of Ko had greeted the news of the past 2 months so warmly. Word had spread quickly through the careful, informal channels that connected the supernatural world, that Ophis, the Ouroboros Dragon, had a son, that he wielded a third, previously unknown heavenly dragon's power, and that he had, within his first months in the human world, earned the trust of a great house heir and negotiated the peaceful resolution of a decades-old territorial mystery that had gone unquestioned since before the Great War itself. Some of that attention was curious, cautious, the kind of careful interest Sirzex himself had shown from the very beginning. Some of it, Issei suspected, watching the wary, calculating glances that occasionally followed him through unfamiliar corners of the supernatural world he had begun, slowly, to explore, was not nearly so friendly. "I feel eyes on us more often now," Kurishin observed one evening, as Issei walked home alone beneath a sky gone fully dark with the deepening cold of early winter. "Not fallen this time. Something else. Careful, patient, the way a hunter watches before deciding whether the prey is worth the risk of the chase." "Any idea who?" Issei asked, keeping his pace steady and unhurried despite the small, familiar prickle of unease crawling up the back of his neck. "Not yet," the dragon admitted. "But the world you have chosen to make a home in, Issei, is wider and stranger than even your mother fully understands. There are old grievances and older powers that have nothing to do with devils or fallen angels at all. I suspect it will not be long before one of them decides you are worth their attention." Issei walked the rest of the way home in thoughtful silence, turning the warning over carefully, aware, in a way he had not quite been before, that the peace he had built in Ko, hard-won and genuinely precious as it was, existed within a much larger world still, one that held far more mysteries, and far more potential dangers, than the quiet resolution of a single sealed fragment of infinity could ever fully account for. He thought of his mother's parting words in the clearing, the promise that she would not be far, and found, standing outside the door of the small apartment that had slowly, steadily, come to feel like his own over these past 2 months, that he was not afraid of whatever waited next. He had built something real here, friendships and trust and a found family that extended, unexpectedly, from a devil heir and her peerage all the way back through the quiet thread to a mother who had once believed she needed nothing and no one, and had learned, slowly and completely, exactly how wrong that belief had been. Whatever came next, whatever old grievance or hidden power had begun, patiently, to take notice of the Black Dragon Emperor walking openly through a world that had never expected him to exist at all. Issei understood, with a settled, quiet certainty that had nothing to do with raw strength and everything to do with everything he had built in the months since he first stepped through a golden seam of light into an unfamiliar sky, that he would not be facing it as the boy who once fell through the endless nothing of the gap, uncertain whether anyone would be there to catch him. He would be facing it as himself. And for the first time in his life, that felt like more than enough. Chapter 15. The winter settled properly over Ko in the weeks that followed the unsealing, turning the walk to school into something crisp and bright, breath fogging in the cold morning air in a way Issei still, months later, found himself quietly delighted by. He had grown used to many ordinary human things by now, the taste of convenience store food Matsuda insisted on sharing, the specific rhythm of exam weeks, the comfortable, easy warmth of lunches spent with people who had become, without much ceremony at all, something close to a second family. Snow was new though, and he found he liked it more than he expected to admit out loud. "You're staring at it again," Rias said, amused, as they walked together toward the old school building one gray, softly snowing afternoon. "The snow. You do that every time it falls." "I never got to see it before," Issei said, unbothered by the teasing. "The gap doesn't really do weather." "I suppose that's fair," Rias allowed, and let the comfortable silence stretch between them for a while before continuing, her tone shifting into something more measured. "There's someone I want you to meet properly, before the term ends. Sona Citri. She runs the student council here, and she's also a devil, heir to another of the great houses. We've known each other since we were children." Issei had seen Sona Citri in passing more than once since arriving at Ko, sharp-eyed and composed behind her glasses, always moving through the halls with the brisk efficiency of someone who ran the school as carefully as she seemed to run everything else in her life. He had sensed faintly the same cool, layered aura of devil power from her that he felt from Rias, though held even more tightly in check. "I take it she already knows what I am," Issei said. "She's known since the week you arrived," Rias admitted. "She's cautious, but fair. I think you'll get along, once she decides you're not a threat to the balance she's spent years maintaining here." A faint smile. "She takes that balance very seriously." They found Sona in the student council room after classes ended, seated behind a desk stacked with neatly organized paperwork, her queen, a tall, quiet girl with white hair named Tsubaki, standing at her shoulder. Sona looked up as they entered, adjusting her glasses with a small, precise motion before her sharp gaze settled fully on Issei. "So this is the Black Dragon Emperor everyone has been so carefully not talking about," she said, not unkindly, though there was an edge of dry appraisal in it. "I've read the reports from the unsealing. Impressive work, resolving something that old without a war breaking out over it." "I had a lot of help," Issei said. "Modesty," Sona observed. Rias's reports mentioned that too. She studied him a moment longer before gesturing toward the chairs across from her desk. "Sit. I'd rather understand exactly what kind of presence is walking through my school before rumors do the explaining for me." The conversation that followed was more clipped and practical than Issei's earlier meeting with Surzex had been, Sona asking careful, pointed questions about Kurishin's capabilities, about Ophis's continued involvement in the town, about whatever other supernatural attention the events of the past 2 months might have drawn. Issei answered as honestly as he judged wise, and found, gradually, that Sona's initial cool caution eased, incrementally, into something closer to the same guarded respect Rias herself had offered him weeks before. "You understand," Sona said near the end of the conversation, "that a being as old and layered as your mother choosing to involve herself in this town's affairs, even peacefully, changes the calculus for everyone who has a stake in it. I don't say that as an accusation. Only as a fact you should be aware of." "I understand," Issei said. "I'm not trying to make this town more complicated than it already is. I just want to keep the people in it safe." "That," Sona said, something almost approving in her tone despite its clipped precision, "is exactly the answer I was hoping to hear." It was on the walk back from that meeting, the snow falling soft and steady around them, that Rias grew suddenly, noticeably quiet, her earlier easy warmth fading into something more careful, more guarded. Issei noticed it immediately, The way he had learned, over the past months, to notice every small shift in the people who had come to matter to him. Something's wrong, he said, not quite a question. Rias was quiet for a long moment before answering, her gaze fixed somewhere in the middle distance, on nothing in particular. There's something I haven't told you, she said finally. About my family. About why being the heir to a great house isn't always as simple as it looks from the outside. You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, Issei said carefully. No, Rias said, shaking her head slightly. I think I should. Especially now, since something's coming that I won't be able to keep separate from the rest of this much longer. She drew in a slow breath, and when she continued, her voice had steadied into something more deliberate, more resigned. My family arranged a marriage for me years ago. To the heir of the Phoenix clan. It was meant to strengthen ties between two of the remaining great houses, after the war left so few of us to carry the old bloodlines forward. Issei felt something cold and unfamiliar settle low in his chest, a feeling he did not immediately have a name for, sharp and unwelcome. You never agreed to that, he said slowly. Did you? It was never really about agreeing, Rias said, a faint, tired bitterness threading through the words. It's about duty. About what's expected of someone born into a great house with as few heirs left as mine has. She glanced sideways at him, something careful and searching in her expression. I've managed to delay it this long by throwing myself into building my peerage, into proving I could stand as a capable heir on my own merits before anyone forced my hand. But delay only lasts so long, Issei. I think that time is running out. Issei did not answer right away, turning the weight of what she had just told him over carefully, feeling, beneath the cold unfamiliar knot in his chest, something else beginning to settle into place, quiet and certain. He thought of every quiet, small moment of the past 2 months, every rooftop conversation and shared meal, an instance of Rias standing firm and unwavering beside him against threats either of them had fully understood at the time. He thought of his mother, vast and ancient and once utterly alone, who had learned slowly that even the most solitary existence could be changed entirely by choosing to care about someone else's well-being over her own comfort. If it comes to that, he said finally, quiet but resolute, you won't be facing it without people who'll stand beside you. I promise you that much, whatever else happens. Rias looked at him for a long moment, snow settling softly in her crimson hair, something in her expression shifting into a warmth that went deeper than the easy, comfortable friendship they had built over the past 2 months, something neither of them fully named out loud but which settled, quietly and unmistakably, into the space between them all the same. Thank you, she said softly. I mean that, Issei. More than you probably realize. They did not have long to sit with the quiet weight of that moment. 3 days later, a servant of the Gremory household arrived at the old school building unannounced, silver-haired and formally dressed, carrying with her an aura of restrained, immense power that made even Rias straighten with sudden, careful attention the moment she stepped through the door. Grafia, Rias said, and something in the single word carried both familiarity and dread in equal measure. Rias, the woman replied, her tone crisp and formal, betraying nothing. I bring word from your family. Lord Phoenix has requested a formal meeting, to discuss the terms of your engagement going forward. He will be arriving within the week. The room went very still, and Issei, watching Rias's expression carefully as the weight of that announcement settled over her, felt curious stir low and thoughtful in his chest, already, quietly, beginning to consider exactly what kind of confrontation was now, unavoidably, headed their way. Chapter 16. Riser Phoenix arrived exactly 1 week later, stepping through a grand, elaborate transportation circle into the old school building's largest meeting hall with the kind of theatrical flourish that told Issei, before the man had even fully spoken a word, exactly what sort of person he was dealing with. He was tall, blond, handsome in a sharp, deliberate way that seemed carefully cultivated rather than simply natural, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Issei's entire apartment. He surveyed the gathered room, Rias and her full peerage standing on one side, Serzex and Grafia positioned formally near the center, Issei standing quietly near the back with Asia close beside him, with an expression of lazy, entitled amusement that made something in Issei's chest tighten immediately with dislike. Rias, darling, Riser said, his voice carrying an oily, performative warmth that did nothing to soften the possessive edge beneath it. You look as lovely as ever. Though I do wish you'd stop putting off the inevitable. It's beginning to look like you're avoiding me. I've been busy, Rias said, her tone cool and controlled, though Issei could see the tension held carefully in her shoulders. Building my peerage. Protecting my territory. I haven't had much time to spare for social calls. Territory, Riser repeated, letting the word roll off his tongue with faint, condescending amusement, his gaze sweeping dismissively across the assembled peerage before landing, finally, on Issei, lingering there with sudden, sharpened interest. Ah. And this must be the little dragon everyone's been whispering about. Ophis's boy, is it? I'll admit, I expected someone more imposing. You'll find I'm imposing enough when it matters, Issei said evenly, meeting the man's gaze without flinching, feeling curiosity coil low and warningly in his chest. Riser's smile sharpened, something cold flickering behind the surface charm. How territorial, he said, glancing toward Rias with pointed amusement. Has this one been keeping you company while I've been patient, darling? I hope you haven't grown too attached. It would be such a shame to disappoint him. That's enough, Riser Serzek said, his easy warmth cooling into something firmer, more authoritative. We're here to discuss the terms of the engagement, not to provoke my sister's peerage. Of course, Riser said, waving a dismissive hand, though his gaze lingered a moment longer on Issei before finally shifting away. Forgive me. I simply find it interesting, seeing exactly who my future wife has been spending her time with. He turned his attention fully back to Rias, his tone shifting into something more businesslike, though the possessive edge never fully left it. The families have agreed. The wedding will proceed within the month, once the formal announcements have been made. I trust you'll come to see the wisdom in it in time. I haven't agreed to anything, Rias said, sharp and immediate, her earlier careful composure cracking under the weight of open defiance. I never have. This was decided for me, not by me. Family duty rarely asks for our personal preference, darling, Riser said, something colder settling into his handsome features. You know that as well as I do. The Gremory line needs strong heirs, and mine is one of the few remaining bloodlines suitable to provide them alongside yours. Sentiment doesn't factor into it. Issei felt the cold, unfamiliar knot from days before tighten sharply in his chest, and beside him, he felt Asia's hand find his sleeve, small and steadying, grounding him against the sharp, protective anger threatening to spill over into something he might regret. Careful, Kurishin murmured, its tone low and watchful. This is not a fight you can win with force, not here, not now. This is a political matter, bound by rules older and more rigid than a single dragon's strength, however great that strength has become. If you act rashly, you may cost her more than you help. Issei drew in a slow, steadying breath, forcing the sharp edge of his anger back beneath careful control, though it cost him more effort than he wanted to admit. There has to be another way to settle this, he said before he could stop himself, drawing every eye in the room toward him. Something that doesn't just hand her over like property, without her having any say at all. Riser's gaze snapped back to him, something dangerous flickering behind his earlier amusement. And what would you know about it, boy? This is a matter for devil nobility. It doesn't concern you. It concerns me because she's my friend, Issei said, holding the man's gaze steadily despite the growing tension crackling through the room. And because I don't think forcing someone into a marriage they never agreed to is something anyone should just accept quietly, no matter how old the tradition is. The room fell into a tense, brittle silence, and it was Graphia, silent and formal until now, who finally spoke, her voice carrying the calm, measured authority of someone well used to navigating exactly this kind of impasse. There is precedent, she said, for a raiding game to settle disputes of this nature. If Lady Rias wishes to formally contest the engagement, she may challenge Lord Phoenix to a match. Should her peerage win, the engagement will be dissolved, and the matter will not be raised again by either family. Riser's expression shifted, something almost delighted flickering across his handsome features, the confident, entitled amusement of a man who clearly did not consider the possibility of losing worth taking seriously. A raiding game, he said, savoring the words. How delightfully old-fashioned. Very well. I accept the terms, if darling Rias is truly so determined to embarrass herself in front of the Underworld's nobility. His gaze slid, deliberate and pointed, back toward Issei. Though I should warn you, boy, whatever fondness you've developed for my future wife's peerage, a rating game is settled by devils, not dragons. Your little pet won't be able to save her from that ring. Actually, Xerxes interjected, his tone mild but carrying an unmistakable weight of finality. Servants of a peerage aren't the only participants permitted, under certain conditions. If Issei is formally recognized as an ally of the Gremory house, and Rias chooses to invoke that alliance, he may participate as an auxiliary combatant. It's rare, but not without precedent. Riser's confident smile faltered, just slightly, before smoothing back into place. Fine, he said, with the forced ease of someone determined not to appear rattled. Bring the dragon along, if it makes darling Rias feel better about her odds. It changes nothing. I have 16 Phoenix reincarnated servants at my disposal, boy. My family's flame does not simply die. You'll find that out the hard way, if you're foolish enough to stand against it. Rias stepped forward then, drawing herself up with the full, steady authority of a great house heir finally given a real chance to fight for her own future rather than simply accept it. Then it's decided, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. I challenge you formally, Riser Phoenix. My peerage against yours. If I win, this engagement ends permanently. And if you lose, Riser said, something dark and satisfied curling into his smile, you'll marry me without complaint, and your little dragon friend will simply have to accept that some things aren't his to protect. I won't lose, Rias said, and beside her, Issei felt the full, quiet weight of his own resolve settle firmly into place, matching hers. Neither will I, he said, low and certain, meeting Riser's gaze one final time before the man turned, with an elegant, dismissive flourish, and stepped back through his transportation circle, leaving the room in tense, charged silence behind him. The battle for Rias's future, Issei understood, standing amid the quiet, gathered weight of her peerage's shared resolve, had just been set into motion, and there would be no walking away from it now. Chapter 17. The month that followed passed in a blur of focused, relentless preparation, the easy, comfortable rhythm of ordinary school life folding almost entirely into the background as Rias's peerage threw themselves into training for the rating game with an intensity Issei had not fully witnessed from any of them before. You understand how this works, Rias explained, the evening after Riser's departure, gathering everyone in the old school building's largest room, a projection of the game's rules hovering in shimmering light above the table between them. Rating games are fought on a constructed field, divided into territory, using pieces that reflect each combatant's role within their king's peerage. Pawns, knights, bishops, rooks, queen. Strategy matters as much as raw strength. Riser has 16 pieces to my 8, but Phoenix reincarnation means his side can absorb losses more easily than most. We'll need to be smarter than simple attrition allows. And me? Issei asked. Where do I fit into all that? As an auxiliary, you're not bound by the peace system, Xerxes explained, having stayed behind personally to help oversee the preparation, his earlier warmth now settled into something more focused, more tactical. You'll operate independently, which gives us flexibility Riser won't be expecting. But it also means you'll be a priority target the moment the match begins. He knows exactly what you're capable of now. He'll come at you hard, hoping to remove the wild card from the board as quickly as possible. Let him try, Issei said, and felt Kirishin's quiet, steady confidence echo the sentiment from somewhere deep in his chest. The training itself was grueling in a way Issei had not fully experienced since his earliest years learning to control Kirishin's power and the endless nothing of the gap. Kiba sparred with him for hours at a time, testing his reflexes against blinding speed and precise, calculated strikes, teaching him to read an opponent's balance and anticipate the angle of an attack before it fully committed. Kaneko, despite her small size and quiet demeanor, hit like something several times her weight, and more than once sent Issei sprawling across the training grounds with a single, perfectly placed strike that left his ears ringing and his respect for her considerably deepened. You telegraph your big strikes, she told him bluntly, after one particularly humbling exchange, offering a hand to help him back up. Kirishin's power is strong, but if Riser's people learn to read the wind-up, they'll dodge before it lands. Slow down the build-up. Make it look the same as your smaller hits until the last possible second. It was good advice, and Issei spent the following days practicing exactly that, learning to mask the surge of Kurishin's power beneath a more even, controlled outward calm, until even Kiba, watching closely for the tell, struggled to predict when a strike was about to carry its full weight. Akino taught him something different, less about physical combat, and more about reading the emotional temperature of a fight, the way fear and overconfidence both created exploitable openings if you knew how to watch for them. Riser's people are used to winning easily, she told him, over tea one evening after a particularly long training session. Complacency is its own kind of weakness. If you can make them doubt themselves, even briefly, you'll find openings that raw strength alone would never give you. Asia, unable to contribute much in direct combat training, found her own way to matter, practicing her healing under Akino's careful supervision until she could mend a serious wound in a fraction of the time it had taken her when Issei first met her at the shrine. I want to be useful too, she told him, quiet determination settled into her usually gentle expression. I can't fight the way the rest of you can. But I can make sure you're all able to keep fighting, if it comes down to that. You're already useful, Issei told her, and meant it fully. More than you probably realize. Rias herself trained separately, often alone, practicing the full extent of her power of destruction against reinforced training constructs until the air around the old school building's grounds crackled faintly with the residual scorch of her magic even hours after she had finished. Issei found her there one evening, well past when the others had gone home for the night, standing amid a field of shattered, smoking practice dummies, her shoulders set with a tired, determined tension that told him clearly exactly how much weight she was carrying into this fight. You should rest, he said gently, approaching slowly. I will, Rias said, not turning to look at him, her gaze fixed on the last standing practice construct. Once I'm certain this is enough. Once I'm certain I won't be the reason any of you get hurt out there. Rias. Issei waited until she finally turned to look at him before continuing, his voice steady and certain. This isn't just your fight. We're all choosing to be here, because we believe in you, and because none of us think you should have to accept a future you never chose for yourself. Whatever happens in that game, you're not carrying it alone. Something in her tired, guarded expression softened, cracking open just slightly around the edges, and for a long moment she simply looked at him, snow beginning to fall softly around them both in the quiet, empty training grounds. I keep thinking, she said finally, quiet and unguarded in a way she rarely allowed herself to be, about what happens after. If we win. I've been so focused on the fight itself that I haven't let myself think much past it. She met his eyes, something vulnerable and searching in her expression. What do you think happens after, Issei? He held her gaze, feeling the weight and warmth of the question settle into something he had been carefully, quietly turning over himself for weeks now, ever since she had first told him about the engagement on that snowy walk home. I think, he said slowly, that whatever happens after is worth fighting for. That's enough for me to know right now. Rias's expression eased fully then, something warm and grateful and entirely unguarded breaking through, and for a moment, standing together in the softly falling snow amid the scorched remains of her evening's training, the weight of the coming battle felt, briefly, lighter than it had in weeks. Get some rest, Issei said again, gentler this time. We've got a raiding game to win. I'd rather you go into it steady than exhausted. You sound like my brother, Rias said, a tired, genuine smile finally breaking through. I'll take that as a compliment, Issei said, and together they walked back toward the old school building beneath the quiet, falling snow, the coming battle waiting for them still, but somehow, for that one quiet evening, feeling a little less impossibly heavy than it had before. Chapter 18. The day of the raiding game arrived beneath a clear, cold winter sky, and Issei stood with the rest of Rias's peerage in a small antechamber adjacent to the constructed battlefield, feeling the particular, electric stillness that always seemed to settle over a group of people about to walk into something that mattered enormously. Remember the plan, Rias said, her earlier vulnerability from the training grounds fully folded away now beneath the steady, focused authority of a king preparing to lead her peerage into battle. Kiba and Kaneko take the front, drawing out Riser's more aggressive pieces early. Aquino provides ranged support and covers our flanks. Asia stays back, ready to heal the moment anyone needs it. Issei. She met his eyes, something steady and trusting passing between them. You're our wildcard. Move where you're needed most. I trust your judgment. I won't let you down, Issei said, and felt Kurishin stir, low and ready in agreement. The battlefield itself, when the transportation circle deposited them onto it, was a sprawling, constructed replica of a forest, tall trees and rocky outcroppings arranged across a wide territory bisected by a shallow river, the whole environment humming faintly with the magic that would broadcast the match to the assembled devil nobility watching from a safe, distant viewing gallery. Riser's forces were already visible in the distance, a full 16 pieces arrayed with the casual, overconfident spacing of a side that did not expect the fight to last particularly long. Riser himself hovered near the back of his formation, wings of flame extended, his earlier lazy amusement now sharpened into focused, tactical attention as he surveyed Rias's smaller, more tightly coordinated group. The match began with a horn blast that echoed across the whole constructed field, and immediately, the battlefield exploded into motion. Kiba moved first, a blur of speed and steel closing the distance toward Riser's front line before most of the Phoenix Peerage's pawns had fully registered the engagement had started, his blade finding gaps in their defense with the same precise, economical grace Issei had spent weeks sparring against. Kaneko followed close behind, her enhanced strength shattering through a knight's guard with a single, devastating blow that sent the piece crashing back into a stand of trees hard enough to splinter the trunks. Issei surged forward alongside them, black armor unfolding in a rush of displaced air, and felt the first real test of the game's stakes settle into sharp, immediate focus as 3 of Riser's remaining pieces converged on him at once, exactly as Surzex had predicted. They're testing your defenses, Kurishin observed, its attention sharp and analytical even amid the chaos of combat. Careful. Remember what Kaneko taught you. Mask the build-up. Issei fought with the controlled, deliberate patience he had spent the past month refining, absorbing early strikes on the reinforced plating of his armor, letting his attackers grow gradually more confident, more careless, before finally unleashing the full weight of Kurishin's power in a strike that caught the lead attacker entirely off guard, sending the piece skidding backward across the churned, muddy ground of the riverbank. Across the field, Aquino's lightning split the winter sky in brilliant, precise arcs, driving back a cluster of Riser's bishops attempting to flank Rias's position, while Rias herself moved with the calm, devastating authority of a king fully committed to the fight, her power of destruction unmaking entire sections of the constructed forest with each careful, deliberate strike. It was Riser's queen who proved the most dangerous early obstacle, a tall, elegant woman whose blade work matched Kiba's for speed and precision, forcing a tense, extended duel that neither side could immediately break. Issei broke away from his own engagement to help, closing the distance in time to catch a strike meant for Kiba's exposed flank, the impact ringing loud and sharp through the cold winter air. Careful, he said, planting himself firmly beside Kiba. 2 against 1 feels a lot more fair. The queen's eyes narrowed, assessing the shift in odds with cold, professional calculation, before she disengaged, retreating toward the cover of Riser's remaining formation rather than risk a fight she now judged unfavorable. It was, Issei realized, exactly the kind of opening Aquino had told him to watch for, the small crack of doubt in an opponent used to easy victories. The fight ground on for what felt like hours, though Issei knew from Sona's earlier briefing on the rules that raiding games moved faster than they felt from inside them, each exchange of blows and magic carrying weight far beyond its immediate, physical impact. Riser's forces fell, one by one, to Rias's tightly coordinated strategy, Phoenix reincarnations slowing their losses but not preventing them entirely, each down piece requiring precious time and energy to restore that Riser could not spend indefinitely without exhausting his own reserves. By the time the battle narrowed down to its final, decisive confrontation, only Riser himself remained standing against what was left of Rias's peerage, his earlier confident amusement entirely gone now, replaced by something sharper, more genuinely alarmed. This isn't how this was supposed to go, he snarled, wings of flame flaring wider, brighter, as he prepared to make his final stand. You were supposed to be an easy victory, Rias. A quiet, convenient arrangement between families. I was never yours to arrange, Rias said, standing steady and unbroken at the center of her remaining peerage, Issei positioned close beside her, Kiba and Kaneko flanking them both, Akino and Asia holding position just behind. This ends now, Riser. One way or another. Riser lunged, flame trailing behind him in a wide, desperate arc, and Issei moved to meet him, the full weight of Kyushin's power finally, fully unleashed, black armor gleaming bright against the winter sky as the two of them collided in the field's shattered, churned center with a force that sent shockwaves rippling outward through what remained of the constructed forest. Chapter 19. The impact of that final collision rattled through Issei's whole body, Riser's flame-wrapped fist meeting his black-armored gauntlet with enough force to crack the frozen ground beneath them both, and for a long, suspended moment, the two of them simply strained against each other, either willing to give ground. You don't understand what you're interfering with, boy, Riser snarled, heat radiating off him in waves that Issei could feel even through the reinforced plating of his armor. This is devil nobility. Old bloodlines, old duties. You're a stray, an outsider playing at belonging somewhere you were never meant to be. Maybe, Issei said, forcing the words out through gritted teeth as he pushed back harder against the pressure of Riser's strength. But I'd rather be an outsider who chose to stand here than someone who thinks people are just pieces to be arranged for convenience. He shoved forward, hard, breaking the stalemate and sending Riser stumbling back several steps, wings of flame flaring wide to catch his balance. Issei did not let up, closing the distance again immediately, and this time, remembering Kaneko's careful lesson, he let his strikes come in an even, controlled rhythm, masking the moment he finally called on the full surge of Kyushin's deeper power until the very last instant. Riser caught the first two strikes, blocking with practiced, arrogant ease, clearly still underestimating exactly how much Issei had grown in the weeks since their first meeting. The third strike, disguised in the same rhythm as the ones before it, carried the full weight of Kyushin's power behind it, and this time, when it connected, it drove Riser backward through the shallow river that split the battlefield in a violent spray of freezing water, the impact loud enough to echo across the whole constructed forest. Riser surged back up out of the water almost immediately, flames hissing and steaming against the wet cold, his expression twisted now into something furious and increasingly desperate. Phoenixes don't simply stay down, he spat, and Issei felt the air around them heat sharply as Riser called on a deeper reserve of his own regenerative power, wounds that should have slowed him sealing shut almost as quickly as they opened. We cannot simply outlast him through attrition, Kyushin warned, its tone sharpening with focused urgency. His regeneration is genuinely formidable. We need something more decisive, Issei, or this will drag on until his advantage wears us down instead. Issei thought fast, turning over everything he had learned in the weeks of training, every lesson from Kiba's precision, Kaneko's patience, Akino's careful reading of an opponent's confidence. He thought, too, of every long hour spent in the endless quiet of the gap, his mother's patient voice teaching him that raw strength alone had never been the whole answer to anything worth solving. Kyushin, he said quietly, feeling the dragon's attention sharpen fully at the deliberate use of its name. The thing you mentioned once. The technique you said I wasn't ready for yet. The dragon was quiet for a long moment, weighing the request with visible care even through the bond between them. You may not be fully ready, it said finally. But I do not think we have a better option remaining. Very well, Issei. Let us see what you have actually become. The jewel on Issei's gauntlet flared suddenly, brilliant and sustained, and a wave of pressure rippled outward from him, sharp enough that even Riser, wading back out of the river with his flame still hissing against the cold, staggered half a step in visible surprise. The black armor around Issei's body shifted, deepened, scales thickening along his forearms and shoulders as a low, resonant hum built steadily in the air around him, the sound of something ancient and enormous finally, fully waking after centuries of patient, quiet sleep. What? Riser breathed, some of his earlier arrogance finally, visibly cracking into something like genuine alarm. Is that something my dragon's been saving? Issei said, his voice carrying an edge of power beneath it that had not been there before, low and resonant, echoing faintly with something that was not entirely his own. Figured now was as good a time as any to find out if I'm ready for it. He moved before Riser could fully brace, faster than either of them had displayed at any point earlier in the fight, and this time, when his fist connected, it carried a weight that no amount of Phoenix regeneration could simply shrug off, driving Riser bodily through the trunk of a massive tree at the battlefield's edge and out into the open, snow-dusted clearing beyond it. Riser did not get back up. The horn sounded a long, echoing note across the whole constructed field, signaling the end of the match, and Issei let the deepened, thickened plating of his armor recede slowly back into its familiar form, breathing hard, the last echoes of Kurishin's fully awakened power settling gradually back into its usual quiet hum beneath his ribs. That, the dragon said, sounding equal parts exhausted and satisfied, is going to require several long naps to recover from. But it worked. You did well, Issei. Rias reached him first, crossing the churned, frozen battlefield at a run, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, simply standing together amid the wreckage of the fight, the cold winter air settling slowly back into stillness around them. We won, Rias said finally, something disbelieving and overwhelmed cracking through her usual composure. Issei, we actually won. Told you we would, Issei said, managing a tired, genuine smile despite the deep exhaustion settling into every part of him. Rias looked at him for a long moment, snow beginning to drift softly down around them both, and then, without quite seeming to decide to do it, closed the last of the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him in a fierce, grateful embrace that Issei returned without hesitation, feeling the whole weight of the past month's tension finally fully break and settle into something warm and steady and entirely worth every bit of the fight it had taken to earn. Across the field, the rest of the peerage gathered slowly around them, Kiba's easy, relieved smile, Kaniko's small, satisfied nod, Akino's warm, teasing laughter, Asia already moving to check that everyone had come through the fight without lasting injury. Somewhere beyond the edges of the constructed battlefield, in the distant viewing gallery, Issei imagined he could feel his mother's quiet, steady approval settling across the whole scene, patient and proud in the particular way that had come, slowly and completely, to mean more to him than almost anything else in either world he now called his own. Rias's future, hard-fought and genuinely earned, belonged fully to her again. And standing there amid the settling snow, surrounded by the family he had built for himself in a town he had once known only through careful lessons and second-hand fragments of memory, Issei understood, with a certainty that went bone deep, that whatever else the wider world still had waiting for him, he had already won something far more valuable than any single fight could measure. Chapter 20. The celebration that followed the raiding game's conclusion was smaller and quieter than Issei might have expected, given the stakes of what they had just won, gathered not in some grand hall of the Underworld but back in the familiar, worn comfort of the old school building, Surzex and Grafia stopping by briefly to offer their formal congratulations before leaving the peerage to their own, more relaxed celebration. You should have seen Riser's father's face, Surzex said, unable to fully suppress a note of genuine amusement beneath his diplomatic composure. I don't think he expected his son's easy engagement to end quite so decisively. It will take him some time to recover his pride, I imagine. I'm not particularly worried about his pride, Rias said, settled comfortably now into a chair near the room's old, familiar hearth, some of the day's exhaustion finally beginning to show in the loose, relieved set of her shoulders. I'm just glad it's over. Really over, not just delayed again. It's over, Surzex confirmed, warmth settling fully back into his expression. The formal dissolution will be finalized within the week. You're free to choose your own future now, Rias, the way you always should have been able to. His gaze shifted, briefly, meaningfully, toward Issei, something knowing and quietly approving in it. All of you fought well today. I'm proud of what you've built here. After Surzex and Grafia departed, the celebration settled into something easier and more familiar, Matsuda and Motohama arriving somewhat later, having been let in on a carefully edited version of events that left out most of the supernatural details but conveyed, clearly enough, that something important had been won. I still don't fully understand what you guys do half the time, Matsuda said, sprawled comfortably on one of the old room's worn couches, but I'm glad it worked out. Also, I'm still holding out hope you'll explain the whole mysterious transfer student thing eventually. Someday, Issei said, unable to keep the fond amusement out of his voice. Maybe. It was well past dark by the time the gathering finally began to wind down, and Issei found himself, eventually, standing alone with Rias on the old building's small balcony, the winter sky above them clear and bright with stars in a way that still, months later, struck him with quiet wonder every time he properly looked up at it. "Thank you," Rias said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "For everything you did today. For everything you've done since the day you first walked into that courtyard, honestly. I don't think I ever properly thanked you for choosing to be honest with me from the very beginning, instead of hiding what you were and letting me find out some other way." "I didn't really have it in me to do it any other way," Issei said. "My mother raised me to think things through, but she also raised me to believe honesty was worth more than the easier path, even when the easier path looked safer." "She raised you well," Rias said, something warm and genuine in the observation. She was quiet for a moment, looking out over the softly lit town spread below them, before continuing, her voice quieter, more careful. "I meant what I asked you, before the game. About what happens after." She turned to look at him directly, something open and unguarded in her expression that Issei had rarely seen from her before. "I know what I'd like it to look like. I've known for a while now, honestly. I just didn't want to say anything until this was settled, until I was free to actually choose it instead of just wanting it while something else hung over both of us." Issei held her gaze, feeling the quiet, steady certainty of his own answer settle fully into place, the same certainty that had been building slowly and completely since the very first conversation they had shared on that rooftop months before. "I think I already know what I'd like it to look like too," he said softly. "I have for a while now, if I'm being honest." The moment stretched between them, quiet and full, the whole of the winter night settled softly around them both, and when Rias finally closed the last small distance between them, Issei met her halfway, feeling something settle into place that had been building, patient and steady, since the very first time her sharp, assessing gaze had found his across a crowded courtyard. Somewhere far beyond the edges of the town, in the endless, silent stillness of the dimensional gap, Ophis felt the warm, settled shift in the thread that always connected her to her son, and allowed herself, alone in the vast quiet of her domain, something that might, in anyone else, have been called a genuine smile. He had built a home for himself, exactly as she had hoped he might, though she had never quite let herself say so plainly. And whatever still waited for him in the wider, stranger world beyond Koa's quiet borders, old grievances and hidden powers and eyes that had only just begun to take careful notice of the Black Dragon Emperor's growing legend, she found, for the first time in the whole of her endless existence, that she was not simply patient about facing it. She was, quietly and completely, ready to help her son protect everything he had chosen to build. Chapter 21. Life in the weeks that followed the raiding game settled into a new, easier rhythm, the town's ordinary winter routines wrapping comfortably around a shift in Issei's life that felt, at once, both enormous and quietly natural. He and Rias did not make any grand announcement of what had changed between them, not exactly, but it did not take long for the rest of the peerage, and eventually most of the school, to notice the shift in how they stood together, how easily her hand found his between classes, how the careful, guarded distance of their earliest conversations had softened, over months, into something steady and openly fond. "About time," Kaneko said flatly, the first time she caught them together on the school roof, though the corner of her mouth twitched with something that might, on anyone else, have been called a smile. "We were wondering how long it would take," Kiba added, with the easy, good-natured amusement of someone who had clearly seen it coming for a while. Matsuda took the news with considerably more dramatic devastation, though even his exaggerated grief faded quickly into genuine happiness for his friend once the initial shock wore off. "I still don't understand half of what's actually going on with you," he told Issei, over lunch one afternoon, "but you look happier than I've ever seen you. So I'm happy for you. Even if you did somehow land the single most popular girl in school without me getting even a little bit of the credit for winging it, I'll make it up to you somehow," Issei promised, laughing, and found, in that easy, ordinary exchange, exactly the kind of uncomplicated warmth he had once believed, standing alone in the endless quiet of the gap, might never actually be his to have. Ophis visited more frequently in the weeks that followed, her appearances growing gradually less startling to Rias's peerage, until her quiet, unannounced arrivals in the old school building had become simply another part of the town's rhythm, accepted the way one accepts weather, vast and occasionally unpredictable but no longer something to fear. She said little during these visits, watching more than speaking, though Issei noticed, each time, the small, quiet ways her presence had softened since the earliest days of his childhood in the gap, a warmth in her stillness that had not been there before he had chosen to build a life beyond her reach. "You are settled here," she observed, one quiet evening, watching Issei and Rias sit together near the old building's hearth, Asia curled nearby with a book, the rest of the peerage scattered comfortably through the familiar room. "More settled than I expected, when I first sent you through that tear in the world." "Is that a problem?" Issei asked, though he already suspected he knew the answer. "No," Ophis said simply. "It is exactly what I hoped for, even if I did not always know how to say so plainly." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the window, toward the quiet, snow-dusted town spread beyond it. "But I did not come tonight only to observe your happiness, Issei. There is something you should know, something I have been turning over carefully since word of your victory over the Phoenix Air reached wider ears than I expected it to." The room's easy warmth cooled slightly at the shift in her tone, every quiet conversation around them gradually falling silent as attention turned fully toward her. "What kind of something?" Rias asked carefully. "There are factions in this world," Ophis said, "older and stranger than devils or fallen angels or even the church you once served, Asia. Beings who exist outside the careful balance the three factions have built, who answer to no single authority, and who have, for reasons I do not yet fully understand, begun asking careful questions about a heavenly dragon who was never supposed to exist at all." Her gaze settled fully on Issei, something protective and unmistakably serious beneath her usual flat calm. "I do not yet know their full intentions. But I know enough to tell you that the peace you have built here, however genuine and however well-earned, exists within a much larger and more dangerous world than the one you have faced so far." Issei felt curiosity stir low and thoughtful in his chest, the dragon's earlier warning about watchful, patient eyes settling suddenly into sharper focus. "You think they're going to come here," he said? "Whoever they are." "I think," Ophis said carefully, "that word of what you have built, and what you are capable of, has traveled further than either of us expected it to. And I think it would be foolish to assume that everyone who takes an interest in that will approach it as carefully, or as peacefully, as the Devil King did." She reached out, resting her hand briefly against the side of Issei's face in the same rare, tender gesture she always offered when the weight of what she needed to say mattered most. "I am not telling you this to frighten you, Issei. I am telling you because you deserve to walk into whatever comes next with your eyes open, the same way I have always tried to prepare you for everything else." Issei held his mother's gaze for a long moment, feeling the quiet, steady weight of everyone gathered around him, Rias's hand finding his, Asia's careful, worried attention, the rest of the peerage settling into the same alert readiness they had carried into the fight against Riser's forces weeks before. Whatever waited beyond the borders of the peace they had built together, he understood, standing there in the warm, familiar glow of the old-school building's hearth, he would not be facing it as the boy who once fell through the endless nothing of the gap, uncertain whether anyone would catch him. He would be facing it surrounded by exactly the kind of family his mother had once believed, in the long, silent centuries before he existed, she would never have any reason to want at all. "Then we'll be ready," Issei said, quiet and certain, and around him, one by one, the rest of the peerage nodded their steady, unwavering agreement, the whole room settling into the same patient, resolute calm that had carried them through every challenge Ko had thrown at them so far. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. Chapter 22. The first sign that Ophis's warning had not been idle came 3 nights later, quiet and almost easy to miss, in the way that truly significant things so often were. Issei had gone out alone that evening, restless in a way he could not quite name, walking the familiar loop of streets between his apartment and the shrine grounds that had, over the past months, become something like a second home to him. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered thick overhead in a sky he still found himself pausing to admire more often than he probably should, and it was in the middle of one of those small, quiet pauses, standing at the edge of the shrine's worn stone steps, that Kurishin went suddenly, completely still. "Someone is watching us," the dragon said, its voice dropping into something low and careful, entirely unlike its usual dry amusement. "Not fallen. Not devil. Something else. Something I do not immediately recognize, which is, in itself, worth being concerned about." Issei stilled, letting his senses stretch outward carefully, the way his mother had taught him during long hours of patient practice in the gap. He found it after a moment, faint and distant, at the very edge of his perception, a presence that felt cool and sharp and entirely unfamiliar, carrying none of the layered, ancient weight of devil power or the cold, oily edge of the fallen. It felt, if anything, oddly similar to his own power, a resonance that tugged at some instinctive recognition he could not quite place. He turned slowly, scanning the tree line beyond the shrine, and found, for just a moment, a figure standing at the very edge of the clearing, tall and pale-haired, watching him with an unreadable, assessing expression from beneath the shadow of the trees. White light seemed to gather faintly around one of the figure's forearms, coiled and contained, and Issei felt a sudden, sharp jolt of recognition settle into his chest even before Kurishin spoke again, its tone carrying something Issei had rarely heard from the dragon before, genuine, careful surprise. "White Dragon Emperor," the dragon said quietly. "That is a Hakuryuku standing in front of you, Issei. My brother's current host." I did not expect to feel that particular resonance again so soon. The figure did not approach, did not speak, simply held Issei's gaze across the quiet, snow-dusted clearing for a long, suspended moment, something unreadable and faintly curious in his pale, sharp-eyed expression. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned and stepped back into the shadow of the trees, and Issei felt the cool, unfamiliar presence fade rapidly into nothing, gone as though it had never been there at all. He stood alone in the clearing for a long moment afterward, breath fogging in the cold night air, turning over everything Kurishin had just told him. He had learned, in his mother's careful lessons deep in the gap, about the two heavenly dragons who had come before Kurishin, the red and the white, sealed away centuries ago into sacred gears passed down through unwitting human hosts. He had never expected to actually meet one of them, not this soon, not standing quietly alone in the same shrine clearing where his mother had reclaimed her fragment of infinity only weeks before. He told Rias everything the following morning, gathered again with the full peerage in the old school building, watching her expression sharpen into careful, focused attention as he described the pale-haired figure and the cool, watchful weight of his presence. "A Hakuryuku," Rias repeated slowly. "That's not a small thing, Issei. The White Dragon Emperor's sacred gear hasn't surfaced in generations, not that I'm aware of. If it's active again, and its host is deliberately seeking you out, that could mean any number of things, not all of them good." "He didn't attack," Issei said. "He just watched. Like he was trying to figure something out." "That's almost more concerning," Akino observed, her earlier easy warmth replaced by something more thoughtful, more careful. "An enemy who attacks immediately, you understand. An enemy who watches first, patient and deliberate, is usually the more dangerous kind." Ophis, when Issei relayed the encounter to her that evening through their familiar quiet thread, went silent for a long moment before answering, and when she finally spoke, her flat voice carried an edge of genuine, careful concern that Issei had rarely heard from her before. "There are old rumors," she said slowly, "of a faction forming outside the balance of the three great powers, gathering beings who exist between the cracks of that careful order, dragons and stray devils and fallen who answer to no single banner. If the current Hakuryuku has aligned himself with something like that, it changes the shape of what may be coming for you considerably." A pause, weighted and careful. "I do not yet know enough to tell you exactly what to expect, Issei. Only that I believe, now more than ever, that the warning I gave you was not idle caution. Something is beginning to move in the wider world, and you are, whether either of us intended it, standing directly in the middle of where its attention has settled." Issei sat with that for a long time after the conversation ended, watching the quiet, familiar lights of the old-school building's common room, Rias curled comfortably beside him, Asia and Kaneko sharing a plate of sweets nearby, Kiba and Akino deep in quiet, easy conversation near the hearth. It was, he thought, exactly the kind of peace worth protecting, hard-won and genuinely precious, and exactly the kind of peace that felt, suddenly, far more fragile than it had only a few short days before. He did not know yet what the pale-haired stranger's watchful curiosity truly meant, or what shape the wider, stranger world beyond Koa's borders had begun, patiently and deliberately, to take notice of him within. He knew only that whatever came next, he would not face it as the boy who had once fallen alone through the endless nothing of the gap, uncertain whether anyone would be there to catch him. He would face it surrounded by the family he had built, and backed by a mother who had learned, slowly and completely, exactly how much she was willing to risk to keep that family safe. Whatever was watching from the shadows at the edge of his world, Issei understood, settling into the warm, familiar comfort of the room around him, would find that out soon enough. Chapter 23. Sona summoned Issei and Rias to the student council room 2 days later, her expression carrying its usual brisk efficiency, though something more guarded sat beneath it as she gestured for them both to sit. "I've heard about your visitor," she said, without preamble, adjusting her glasses with a precise, deliberate motion. "News like that doesn't stay quiet for long, not in circles that pay attention to this kind of thing. I've already had 2 separate inquiries from contacts in the Underworld asking whether Ko is about to become a battleground for something bigger than a territorial dispute." "That's not exactly reassuring," Issei said. "It isn't meant to be," Sona said, though not unkindly. "I'd rather you understand the stakes clearly than walk into whatever's coming with false comfort." She folded her hands atop her desk, her sharp gaze moving between the two of them. "My sister has connections within the Gremory that go beyond the usual diplomatic channels. I've asked her to look into whether Azazel himself has any knowledge of a faction operating outside the 3 factions' balance. If anyone would know, it's him." "Azazel," Rias repeated. "The fallen angel governor-general himself. That's reaching pretty high up the chain for a first inquiry. When a hacker yoku starts watching a newly discovered heavenly dragon from the tree line without explanation," Sona said dryly, "I think reaching high up the chain is exactly the appropriate response." Her expression softened, just slightly, as she looked to Issei directly. "For what it's worth, I don't think this town, or the people in it, are as unprepared as whoever is circling us might assume. You've already proven that once, against Riser. I suspect you'll prove it again, if it comes to that." "Thank you," Issei said, something steadying settling into him at the quiet, practical confidence behind her words. "I mean that." "Don't thank me yet," Sona said, echoing, without seeming to realize it, the same words Rias had once offered him months before. "Thank me once we've actually gotten through whatever this turns out to be." They left the student council room not long after, walking together beneath a sky just beginning to soften from winter's harshest edge into the first faint promise of an early spring, and Issei found, despite the weight of everything still unresolved and uncertain ahead of them, a quiet, settled calm sitting steadily beneath it all. "You're not scared," Rias observed, glancing sideways at him as they walked. "Given everything Sona just said, I half expected you to be more worried than you look." "I am worried," Issei admitted. "But I've got you. And Kiba, and Kaneko, and Akino, and Asia. And my mother, who I don't think is going to sit quietly on the sidelines if something actually comes for us." He glanced at her. Something warm and certain settled fully behind his eyes. "That's a lot more than I had the day I first stepped through that tear into this world, not knowing anyone at all. Whatever's coming, I like our odds." Rias's expression eased into something warm and fond, her hand finding his as they walked on together beneath the softening winter sky, the quiet, ordinary rhythm of the town settling comfortably around them even as, somewhere beyond its borders, in shadows either of them could yet fully see, something patient and watchful continued, carefully, to take notice of exactly what the Black Dragon Emperor had built for himself, and exactly how much he now had left to protect. That evening, Issei stood alone for a while on the small balcony of his apartment, looking out over the quiet, lamplit streets of the town that had, in the space of less than a year, become something far more permanent to him than he had ever expected when he first stepped through a tear in the world with nothing but his mother's careful lessons and a dragon's ancient, patient voice for company. He thought of the pale-haired stranger watching from the tree line, of Sona's careful warning, of his mother's steady, unshakable promise that she would not be far no matter what came next. "You are thinking too loudly," Kurishin observed, with something that might, in a less ancient and dignified creature, have been called fondness. "Rest, Issei. Whatever gathers in the shadows beyond this town's borders will not announce itself tonight. Tomorrow will come soon enough, and it will find you readier for it than you currently believe." "You're probably right," Issei said quietly, watching a light snow begin to drift down once more over the sleeping town below him. "I am always right," the dragon said, with its usual dry, immovable confidence, and despite everything still uncertain ahead of him, Issei found himself smiling as he finally turned back inside, carrying with him the quiet, settled certainty that whatever the wider world still had waiting, he would meet it exactly the way he had met everything else since arriving in Ko. Not alone, and not afraid, but steady and ready, and surrounded by everything worth protecting. Thanks for listening.